across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. Thank you to Peter Cardwell. Julia back tomorrow, of course. Coming up this afternoon, we are, of course, looking at the findings of a report on grooming gangs. It's going to be outlined by Yvette Cooper a little later today. We'll cross live for that. Keir Starmer confirming there will now be a public inquiry after previously saying that those calling for one were jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. He looks like a bit of a turnip now, I think we can all agree. Also this afternoon, Iran has threatened to abandon a treaty aimed at preventing the development of nuclear weapons as rocket fire with Israel continues into its fourth day. We're right across that story. And as we predicted on this programme last week, 1,500 migrants crossed the Channel over the last 3 or 4 days, with more expected this week due to the extraordinary warm temperatures and calm weather. More on that as well. Everything you need to know. All the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. You can obviously call on that number. That's the main number. You can drop us a voice note on that number as well if you want to bypass the queue, as it were. Or you can message 87222. You can contact us on X at Ian Collins UK. Loads of ways to get in touch. And of course, we are discussing, why would we not be, that later this afternoon, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, addressing the House of Commons to talk in detail about the latest government U-turn. I mean, this one is pretty darn seismic. They like a seismic U-turn. In fairness to Labour, they don't do like mini U-turns. They do sort of great screeching ones, industrial scale U-turns. This one is absolutely vast. This is on the National Grooming Gang public inquiry. Remember, it was just half an hour ago, it seems, that they didn't want one. We all remember this.
Calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics.
No, the reason we're not doing another national inquiry is because there's already been a national inquiry.
Do you want an inquiry or not?
No, Paul, I'm trying to answer your question, and the answer is no. We don't think another inquiry, after all the many inquiries that we've put victims through, is the way to tackle this.
There has been a huge amount of misinformation this week. Sadly, party political misinformation. It is just wrong.
Trevor, what is the most important thing here?
Of course, it's the position of the victims. I understand that.
It is the victims, and it's not people's hurt feelings about how they've been spoken about.
Oh, for goodness sake, jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. I mean, they were the Prime Minister's words. Now he's gone, yeah, let's have a public inquiry. There are reasons to be suspicious, somewhat. I mean, do you believe, for example, that an inquiry will get to the truth? And I'm trying to think of inquiries that have ever appeased everyone involved. And I don't think you would ever find one. Once in a while, an inquiry will, sadly, not get into a certain tangent or an angle of a story it will explore so much but doesn't go any further, or it certainly can't establish beyond reasonable doubt of what might have happened. So there's a kind of double-edged sword a little bit with inquiries, because if you look at every single victim of child rape gangs in this country, I don't imagine at the end of this latest inquiry every single one of those people without fail will say, we got justice. This will shine a light on some areas. We do know that there was the Alexis J inquiry. That finished in October 2022. That took 7 years. 7 years. Now, that inquiry looked at a whole range of different issues of child sexual abuse in England and Wales, and the grooming gangs was part of it. Widely seen that it didn't really go far enough into establishing what went wrong, what the issues were, why people were not brought to justice, how it could possibly be that children were getting arrested when found in the homes of grown middle-aged or even elderly men. All of those issues. Did the Alexis J get anywhere near appeasing any of the people that were correctly shouting out forever for justice? Well, educate us on that one if you have a view on what happened there. I think a lot of people not even necessarily aware that there was this huge 7-year inquiry. It looked at all sorts of areas of horrific abuse. Grooming gangs was part of it, but widely seen by many, understandably so, that it didn't really go far enough. It didn't touch the sides when it came to the enormity of this story. I think we first talked about grooming gangs maybe 20 years ago. I can remember this coming up, and it was a sort of a loose discussion. There was some diligent work by the Times at the time that did, and some other journalists as well, that did some really good work in highlighting this. And then over the ensuing years, various people picked up the cause. But it's never had what you would call the international focus that it absolutely means. And this one apparently will do that. The new inquiry will trigger and oversee local investigations in areas where there have been failures and obstructions. I'm quoting there, by councils, the police and other institutions. So Baroness Casey, who led the review into the issue, not the inquiry, the review into the issue, was keen to avoid a prolonged inquiry amid concerns that it could go on for years and fail to provide the justice and answers for victims. She has instead advised the government to take a targeted approach with a new time-limited independent commission expected to oversee local inquiries. It will have the ability to compel people to give evidence. Casey has said that the commission should review cases of failure or obstruction by statutory services to identify localities where local investigations should be instigated. So what does an inquiry like this need to look like? What has it got to establish? Because there is no doubt of criminality, there is no doubt of child rape, child abuse on an industrial scale. There is no doubt that this went on for years, and some suggesting it's still going on today. So what does that have to look like? And I know this is what inquiries do. They're meant to be complicated. If you want to do it properly, it's never going to be a straightforward thing. It's not the sort of thing you do in your sleep. But if you look at how many different agencies and parties and individuals and authorities and institutions seem to be involved in this, and there's not just one case. Now, the first thing you do is don't look at social media, because you will never get to the truth. I took a cursory look this morning for the umpteenth time on this particular story. I'll just give you an example of what social media will tell you. They will tell you that victims of grooming gangs, the number of victims range from 500, some saying 1 million. Now, it's not 1 million and it's not 500, and this is the problem with social media. You don't know quite where the truth is, but sometimes in the absence of a government or anyone else giving you the truth, people fill a vacuum. They go, why are we not being told more about this? We know we've got local authorities. We know we've got local law enforcement. We know we've got some politicians who just systematically either covered up or refused to investigate. The classic story which we tell every time, when one woman, I think she was working in social services, certainly within the local authority, and went into work and said, look, there is a common theme here. We're talking about a pattern of behaviour. You know, if you were watching an episode of Columbo, it's the first thing you'd pick up on. Hang on, what's the pattern here? What's the commonality here? What is happening? And there's of course, there's other forms of abuse, and there's other perpetrators, different MO, different motivations, different horrendous reasoning behind their awful crimes. But this particular crime, the commonality was Pakistani men. And that issue, when raised in one local authority, resulted in the person that raised it being sent on a race awareness course. Now, I would like this inquiry to find who sent that person on a racial awareness course and probably stick them in clink for not just crimes of idiocy, but dangerous. I mean, incredibly dangerous. So we can't say that. And that really underpins, I think, most people have a sense that that's what underpins the problem here, that nobody wanted to talk about the commonality of the perpetrators. But of course, this is much more than just the perpetrators. It's those that facilitated any potential cover-up. Some people have gone to jail. There are people, as recently as last week, another pack of these monsters were found guilty, and there have been others. But this is not just about finding the perpetrators. This is about establishing the cover-up. This is about establishing how it could be that young girls could find themselves getting arrested for being drunk and disorderly when found in the house of 40-year-old men. 2 13-year-olds 14-year-olds getting arrested for drunk and disorderly while in the home. But really, it was that. It's that stuff. Do you trust it? Do you trust that this inquiry will get to the truth? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Simon Danchuk, Reform UK member, is with us. Simon, good afternoon to you.
It's good to be with you, Ian.
Always nice to have you with us. I mentioned at the beginning it's worth just a moment to dwell on this seismic U-turn from Keir Starmer. I mean, we know that governments do from time to time change their mind on something, but this lot have got a PhD in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is completely welcome, the proposal to have an inquiry. I've been calling for it for some time. And you might be aware, Ian, the Alexis J inquiry that you referred to there is one that I campaigned for when I was an MP. Yeah. I was one of a handful of MPs who really held the Home Secretary, Theresa May, at the time to account in terms of getting that established. But what it really did, that inquiry really looked at historical child abuse. So I'd identified Cyril Smith as an abuser. And named him in Parliament as such, and then wrote a book about the abuse that he committed and etc. And that inquiry really looked at people like Smith. It looked at Greville Janner. It looked at Peter Morrison in Chester, who was an MP. All these people are deceased now. So it was very historical. And only, as you point out, a small proportion of that Alexis J inquiry looked at grooming gangs. And that's why we need this new inquiry. And I think it has to do two things. First of all, as you were intimating, it needs to result in some of those professionals, if that's what you could call them, in social services, in local authorities, in the police, who masked what was going on to the point where the abusers were emboldened to commit even more crimes. So they as individuals need to be identified. I am concerned this government just today is talking about identifying the institutions. That's not good enough. We want to know who the individuals were that, for example, said a 10-year-old girl in the recent case in Rochdale was a prostitute. A girl of 10 that's just not possible. No. She was being abused, badly abused. We need to know who that social worker was so action can be taken. And this is what the public wants, I believe. And then the second thing it needs to do, this inquiry, is come up with recommendations that government actually implement. The Alexis J inquiry came up with a range of proposals. I don't think any of them have been implemented yet, if they have just one or two. So we need action on the inquiry's recommendations as well.
Indeed. Let's have a listen then to the Shadow Home Secretary. This is Chris Philps speaking with Mike Graham on Talk this morning.
Well, I think, first of all, Keir Starmer should apologise for smearing campaigners like me as far right for calling for this inquiry. He can start by apologising, and then we need to make sure those accountable, those responsible rather, for covering up these disgusting crimes, simply because the perpetrators were mainly of Pakistani origin. They covered it up for that reason, and those who did that should be held to account and, in my view, prosecuted for the offence of misconduct in public office. And those people who covered this up, senior police officers in some cases, local council leaders, leaders of social services, they should be prosecuted and imprisoned for deliberately covering up these disgusting crimes because they cared more about so-called race or community relations than they did about protecting vulnerable young girls.
Yeah. Now, he's right on all of that, Simon, but of course, you know, as I've said consistently, and Starmer had a pop at Badenoch about this, for 14 years, the Tories didn't have an inquiry on this.
Yeah, absolutely. They should have done. There's no doubt about it. They had the opportunity to do that. So they're in a difficult position on this. But Keir Starmer is now the Prime Minister. And coming out initially, as Chris Phil pointed out there, describing people who were calling for a national inquiry, like myself, suggesting that we were far right for calling for something like this is just appalling. And it's not just Starmer. I mean, Jess Phillips, who's the minister, Home Office minister responsible for this area, she's been saying consistently that we don't need a national inquiry. You've got Yvette Cooper saying we don't need a national inquiry. Now, I believe that's because they don't want to look at the issue because of the Labour votes that are involved in terms of the community on which it's going to focus. But now they've been bounced into a decision by Louise Casey. A very impressive public servant. I've known her for several years. I did some work with her many years ago around rough sleeping. She really reduced the number of homelessness in London in some of the work that she did as a public servant, and she's been used time and again by the Blair government, but also by Conservative governments to do this type of work. And she's very much her own woman. She wouldn't have come out and told Starmer's line, and she's come out and said there should be a national inquiry. So Starmer has now had no choice but to do, as you've been pointing out, a gigantic U-turn. But thank goodness it has been. We just need to get the terms of reference right.
Yeah, spot on. Stay with us, Simon. More to come. We'll look at Israel and Iran, of course. What has happened or happening with Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron. I think Starmer's got the begging bowl out there as well. And legal gender transitions hit record highs in the UK. What the heck's going on that one? More from you as well. 87222 if you're messaging, 0344 499 1000 on the phone, and leave a voice note there as well. Coming up on 1:20, this is Talk.
You can't try and snipe at the Conservatives for things that weren't our fault.
Oh, I mean, I haven't got time. So tell your big mate Donald Trump to tell his big mate Vladimir Putin to stop killing people, then we can solve that problem like that. Are you going to be a net contributor to our society? But are you going to better the lives of the people already here?
Won't be surprised to know I disagree.
Why? Why do you disagree, though? Why do you want our young people left on the scrap heap? The court's time being wasted, laying down a ruling on what is a woman.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of comment coming through. I'll get to as many of those as I can shortly. We've got Simon Danchuk with us, former Labour MP, now Reform UK member. Obviously, Simon, it would be remiss not to mention what is happening in the Middle East just 4 days after launching strikes on the country. Israel has said it has full aerial operational control over the Iranian capital, Tehran. Let's have a listen to Rachel Reeves speaking on the Middle East issue yesterday.
Israel has every right to defend itself. We also are very concerned about Iran's nuclear deterrent. The US have also been clear they haven't been involved in these strikes to date. We have in the past supported Israel when there have been missiles coming in. I'm not going to comment on what might happen in the future, but so far we haven't been involved, and we're sending in assets to both protect ourselves and also potentially to support our allies.
At the moment, Simon, I mean, it's difficult for this government, isn't it? At the moment, their support is sort of slightly waning for Israel.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think they're on the wrong page in relation to Israel, actually. Starmer hasn't been as robust as what Rachel Reeves was there. He's been suggesting that Israel needs to pull back. I would I would argue against that. I think Israel is doing the work that needs to be done. I think we should give credit to Israel for challenging Iran in this way. There's no doubt about it, as Rachel Reeves intimated there, that they're trying to develop a nuclear program. That's not acceptable. They are a rogue nation. There's no doubt about that. The US have identified them as the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world since 1984. So the idea that we should just leave it to diplomacy to try and sort these things out, I think, is a mistake. But that's Starmer's view, but I think he's on the wrong page. I'm closer to where Trump is on this. Action needs to be taken, and we should credit Israel for taking the action.
Indeed. Quick word on Starmer, by the way. He's got his plate full at the moment. You know, G7 detail, all sorts of things going on. Apparently he's going to go begging, really, to Emmanuel Macron to do more to stop the boats. 1,500 migrants in 4 days. And I say this every time. You can't really make these numbers. I mean, we hear it so often, it's no longer really that remarkable or surprising. It should be absolutely jaw-dropping if somebody tells you 1,500 people broke into a country in 4 days. In any other world, that would be, you know, a national emergency. But we get this every week now.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's getting worse. I think one of the stats last Thursday, there were 54 individuals in one dinghy alone. I mean, the numbers are unbelievable. He came to the public in the run-up to the general election, did Starmer, saying he had a plan. He was going to smash the gangs. Well, we're now 12 months into Starmer's government, and the situation is worse. We have more illegal immigrants coming into the country than ever before. Ever since he cancelled the Rwanda plan, which was seen to be a deterrent, we've had more and more people coming into the country. And it, you know, people are exceptionally unhappy about this, and no wonder Starmer and the Labour government are so unpopular. This is one of the primary reasons, I would argue.
Yeah, I think I'm absolutely spot on. This one's not going away. Maybe there'll be a U-turn on that one as well, but the only thing they haven't U-turned on so far is sorting out the flipping channel crisis. Also this, almost 10,000 gender recognition certificates have been granted in the UK. In the year to March 2025, 1,169 were issued. That's more than 3 times the number in the year of 2019. Of course, these follow that Supreme Court ruling. It's worth reminding ourselves what they said in that summing up at the Supreme Court just a couple of months ago. Have a listen.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
Well, they were quite clear. I guess there's some people, maybe, Simon, in a race to make sure they've got certification, which I think is... I think it puts you in a different status if you've got that certificate. I'm not fully sure on that. It's a bit sketchy, but not really surprising that the number seems to have gone up in the last couple of months.
Yeah, no, not surprising at all. And it's all to do with a little piece of legislation that I wasn't overly familiar with from 2005, this Gender Recognition Act, which allows people to prove that they're of a different gender now, and they can change their gender on their birth certificate. I'm not sure how this is going to hold water now that the Supreme Court has reached the conclusion, the right conclusion, in my view, that it has. You know, if you were born a boy or you were born a girl, then that's what you were born, and that's more or less what the Supreme Court is saying. So it almost makes the certificates redundant, in my view. It's a very complex area, but I don't know how we ever got in this position, to be quite honest. You go down the pub and talk to people, and this is just completely bizarre. You know, most people just don't understand why we're in a position where we can't define, some people can't define what a woman is or what a man is. It's bizarre. You
never really, not only, you know, in the real world, you're right, you don't meet anybody that's on board with all of this stuff. You know, it's just mostly, there are some individuals, of course, who have confusion over the chair. You know, I understand that and have some sympathy with all of that, but generally speaking, the only people that are really animated about it seem to be hardened campaigners, agitators, often just blokes that are neither compromised on their gender, they're just politicised on everything. And that's it. in the real world, nobody talks about this stuff with any level of seriousness.
Completely right, and like you, I have a lot of sympathy with people, you know, who might identify as a different gender. I completely get that, and we've all understood that for many years. You know, but as you point out, the people that really campaign on this are either diversity officers that make a living out of it, or charities or pressure groups that make a living out of it, or some strange people who are out there being exceptionally aggressive to feminists and women who just want to look after women, which I completely understand. It's the most bizarre situation.
Just a final one. We see these stories from time to time. Romeo and Juliet, as in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet at the London Royal Opera House, is now going to come with a trigger warning because it contains violence and death. Now, I mean, there's quite a lot of plays and films that have violence and death in them. You'd be here all day, all millennia, if you try to quote them all. But apparently the Globe Theatre also warns audiences about upsetting themes and even gives a Samaritan's helpline after their shows. I mean, what's it, a theatre show or a counselling session?
It's incredible, isn't it? You've got to laugh. But I think it's related to the last story where you have this very thin vein of individuals throughout organisations and institutions who really push this woke agenda. And that's what's being pushed here. You know, it's insulting to the public. The vast majority of the public have a vague idea, at the very least, what Shakespeare's about and what his plays are about, and quite likely anticipate a bit of death and a few murders along the way. They don't need to be advised about the thing that they might be triggered on. Goodness, it begs belief, it really does.
It really does. Well, you know, we've got Ian McKellen and Christopher Biggins both saying this is nonsense. When Biggins speaks, the world listens, Simon, as we all know.
No, absolutely. He's an intellect on a different level in many respects. I always listen to him. Yeah,
absolutely right. Yeah, read all of his philosophy books. Listen, Simon, always good to have you on. Simon Danchuk. We actually love Christopher Biggins, by the way. And as a seasoned performer, he's called it a joke and said it's an insult to theatre-goers' intelligence. And he's absolutely right about this. Trevor says, afternoon, Ian, when it comes to rape gangs, I really don't think Starmer's government will now survive the full 5 years. Also with world events as well, I think we're about to see a cultural major earthquake. Mark says, your beloved Tories, my beloved Tories, were in power for 14 years until 2024. At what point did I miss them asking for a national grooming gang inquiry? Did I miss it? Oh, I didn't, because they didn't ask for one at the time. But no one's denying that. They should have done, and they didn't. In fact, nobody was asking for one where they should have been. There were individuals, there were campaigners. Mark then says, which is slightly extraordinary, Labour have been in power for 10 months, and guess what? We're having a grooming gangs inquiry. Well, I don't think that quite defines what's happened here. They completely and utterly refused to have a grooming gang inquiry. They read the room, realised they're going to get a royal kicking over this, like winter fuel allowance and God knows what else. Now they're having one. But you're quite right. The Tories can't go, look, we told you so, because the Tories did naff all on this one prior for the last 14 years. And in fact, if it did come up, and I'm sure there's examples of somebody asking for one, they certainly didn't even entertain it. We're on the same page, Mark. 0344 499 1000. It's 1:30. We'll get more comment in this coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This.
Andy says Ian Keir Starmer should resign, not apologise. A lot of people would support that. Cheryl says, I reported this to the police. I was dismissed. I reported it to the Home Office. I was dismissed. And I reported the request for help. I was dismissed. So where do you go? You go it. No one is actually listening. That, I think, is sort of forms a fairly common underpinning of where things have gone wrong. The sense that nobody was listening. We're talking about kids here, children. Let's remember, we can use the word grooming if you want. We are talking about rapists and child sex offenders. And we already know on a very, very large scale. An inquiry will attempt to give more specifics, one would assume, on just how common and over what period of time this was happening. I would like to think it will also get into the real detail of how, and this is really central to it, isn't it, of how children were not just routinely ignored, whistleblowers were not just routinely ignored, but often either prosecuted themselves or threatened with some level of prosecution. Well, what are you doing out late at night? You know, why are you dressed like that? You're drunk and disorderly. Yeah, I'm 12 and I'm in a house with 6 50-year-old men. I think that might be where you want to look for the trouble. All of that. Now, I don't know how an inquiry is able to bring it all together, but we hope it can do so in a way that truly authenticates and recognises the sheer level of seriousness here. And I think that's the point, isn't it? The sense for many victims that it's just not really been taken seriously. It's a storm in a teacup. Yes, it does involve some Pakistani men, but don't dwell on that. It's, you know, we'll try and get to the... It's that feeling. What is the correlation here? Why is there a commonality between perpetrator and victims, etc.? What was happening? Why was it ignored? Local council, law enforcement, social services, even areas in teaching, you know, completely ignored for years. And that's clearly what this, well, one would assume, Yvette Cooper will outline the findings of the Casey report this afternoon in the Commons, and we'll get more detail. Keir Starmer has confirmed there will be now a public inquiry, despite previously, in fact, he didn't. It's interesting, we had that comment from Mark. Labour didn't just refuse one, they actually criticised people who asked for one, suggesting they were far-right bandwagon jumpers. We'll speak in a moment to the Executive Chair of the Women's Policy Centre on this very point. First, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. I know you've written quite a bit over time on this one, Tom. Good afternoon to you. Was this just on the politics of it all? Was this just a simple case that Starmer thought, hang on, we're up one of those cul-de-sacs again here, and if I don't sort this, I'm in even bigger trouble than I currently am?
I mean, it's probably a bit of both. I mean, there is this element with Keir Starmer where he doesn't like making decisions. Therefore, if he can get some kind of external expert in the form of Dame Louise Casey to go through this and then to give him the instruction to actually go down this line, then he kind of prefers to operate in that fashion. I also think that maybe reading the, we're told, 200-page report that's been put together here did genuinely change his mind, but that doesn't get away from what a moral husk it's exposed him as a Prime Minister. I mean, it was only 6 months ago, as you were saying, that he was calling people, you know, calling for this national inquiry as people jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Now he seems to have boarded that bandwagon himself. So I think it's, regardless of how we got here, it reflects very badly on his leadership and the Labour Party more broadly, I think.
How do you see this distinguishing itself from the Jay inquiry? That, of course, lasted for 7 years. It was very thorough stuff. The brief was a little wider because it looked into all sorts of other elements of child abuse, but it did include grooming gangs. What was the suspicion on that, Tom, as far as you can tell? What was it lacking that this inquiry, as far as some people are concerned, will hopefully address?
Well, I think it's precisely the fact that that inquiry was not singularly about grooming gangs. It was about child sex abuse more broadly. It was originally sparked by basically the kind of post-Savile concerns about widespread child abuse. It went through various different chairs. The grooming gangs was a small part of it, where it's quite clear that there were very specific failings here. I think that's one deflection that politicians like Keir Starmer have tried to do over the years, tried to treat this as kind of one form of child abuse among many. It has very specific characteristics in terms of the profile of the perpetrators, the profile, generally speaking, of the victims, and the fact that in town after town, whether it's Rotherham, whether it's Telford, where there have been internal reports before, you see the same picture of cover-up because of fears of racial relations being damaged by talking about this too openly and so on and so forth. It's clearly a very specific thing which needs to be looked at on its own terms, and hopefully that's what we'll get here.
Yeah, well, you'd hope so. I guess no inquiry ever comes out with everyone satisfied. That is going to be the difficulty. Depending on who you listen to will give you an idea of how big a problem this is. There are some people who talk about victims in their hundreds. There are some people who talk about victims in their hundreds of thousands. I mean, that's how wide the speculation is on this. So there's bound to be some people who say, yep, the inquiry did touch on what we needed it to do, but there will doubtless be others that feel it still will leave them with that sense of injustice.
Oh, no, absolutely, which is why, if this is going to happen, it needs to be done in a particular way. It's been encouraging to see noises from the government that they don't want this to drag on for another 7-8 years. I think whenever you have that, that's just a way of avoiding accountability. And this is a scandal that we've known about for at least 25 years now, really, in terms of when people first started to come forward. So any more can kicking is not a good idea. I also think it's absolutely crucial that people are held to account here. This isn't just a lessons learned, we won't do this in the future. There are councils, there are police forces across the country who have fundamentally failed out of a mixture of cowardice and back covering to investigate these crimes properly, and that's precisely they were allowed to proliferate. So if there's not an element of proper accountability here, it can't just be about lessons learned, we won't do it next time. That's not good enough for the many thousands of victims we're probably looking at here who've been affected by this.
Yeah, and of course an inquiry isn't a criminal court case, but it may well throw up issues that potentially lead to that. And I think there will be some, Tom, understandably, that would like to see people named and shamed, not just not just, oh, the council got it badly wrong. If you were the person in that one council that sent someone on a racial awareness course because they dared to raise the ethnicity of the perpetrators, then I think a lot of people are going to want to know who that individual is.
Oh, no, absolutely, because these people will still have jobs, whether it's in local government or even central government. And that, if we're being perfectly honest here, if we're being perfectly frank, this is clearly a large part of why this government in particular, because a lot of this happened in Labour-run areas, we should say, but also the previous government didn't really want to lift up this stone because of the fact that there are many people who will have made horrendous decisions for the reasons that we've been talking about, and it really is important that they are held accountable as well as the perpetrators. And because of the fact that, again, it's one of the things that is particular to this scandal, it's the scale of the abuse and the horrificness of the abuse, absolutely, but it's also the fact that unlike any other form of child abuse we would see on this scale, the incentive, the desire was to look the other way. And that is something that cannot be allowed to stand if we're not going to repeat these mistakes, as everyone claims we don't want to.
100%. And look the other way because, I mean, it seems, OK, we're not the inquiry here, but, you know, everything we've read about this, there has been some cases and lots of people who've come forward over the many years now who've spoke about this. And the reason is really about race relations, right? I mean, it's that.
No, absolutely. And this is something that comes through in the localised reports that we have had so far. So the report into Rotherham, which was led by Alexis Jay, the report into Telford, which was led by Tom Crowther, they find a very similar story, which is that you have the victims who tend to be not just working class, often very poor in care and so on, very, very vulnerable, who are being preyed upon by predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly Pakistani Muslim men, and it wasn't looked into. In one case, you saw officials openly saying they feared a race riot might kick off if they looked into this. So this story has been repeated time and time again. We just need to see what the scale is now, and we need a government which is willing to not give in to this kind of politically correct desire to look the other way and to actually stare this problem in the face, I think.
Yeah, spot on. Tom, thank you, as ever. He is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Thank you to him. Let's get a word on this from Paolo Diana, who is Executive Chair of the Women's Policy Centre. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
With the Women's Policy Centre, we were asking for a national inquiry since months, and we think it's appalling the behaviour of Keir Starmer. He should apologise to the public, and particularly to women and mothers, because we read the stories of the victims and the survivors, and we cannot believe what we are reading. You know, we cannot think about social workers and police officers who are the ones supposedly to care for these vulnerable girls and protect them, talking about them, about 9 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old girls as child prostitutes, having lovers. This is unacceptable. Yes. It's not neglect. Yeah. This is being complicit in one of the worst child abuse cases this nation have ever seen. So we have to be vigilant on how this inquiry will be held. Not only it has to be quick, but heads should roll. Because it's unthinkable that this same social worker are still working in the same spot they were years ago for over 2 or 3 decades. And the same police officers are doing the same job. We are really tired, and we know the public is not trusting this government anymore. And we think, actually, that it's really naive to not considering the community from which the majority of these perpetrators are coming from. You know, I studied political science, history of religions, and I can tell you, anyone who studies it knows that not all communities are the same. If men coming from predominantly from a certain country where child abuse is rampant and where they think they can have sex with a 10 years old or 12 years old come into Britain and they want to behave in the same way, we must be worried about this man.
100%. But that, of course, is the reason why authorities, whether it was council, social services, I'm sure some in education, law enforcement, that they didn't want to rock that boat, right? I mean, the idea that you would suddenly suggest, because this inquiry is as much about not in any way reducing the severity and seriousness that this is focusing on, but it's also about multiculturalism. It's also about a clash of cultures. That will underpin this, and that's probably why politicians have been scared witless to even go there.
Absolutely. And we are tired to see that women's rights are always at the bottom of politicians' agenda. They should be at the top of their agenda, because it cannot be continued to sacrifice the rights of these poor girls in front of this ideology that multiculturalism is. We have our values in this society, so we must have accountable people who come here. If they don't want to respect our values, well, they should go back from where they're coming from, and they should go to prison if they're committing crimes, along with everyone who is helping them committing those crimes.
How big do you think this is? And of course, one victim is too many. This isn't a court of law, it's an inquiry. What do you sense this is going to throw up? I see lots of people speculate this is about hundreds of young girls. I see some people say thousands. I see some say hundreds of thousands. What do you sense?
I think it would be definitely thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And I feel for each one of these survivors, because their lives have been broken and destroyed forever. Many of those girls, they had children from these perpetrators. And we know that many of these men still live in the same communities. Yeah. They only served a few years of sentencing. I mean, it's appalling. Anything that is related to this scandal is appalling. And all these councillors who were in charge at the time, we know the majority of them are from the Labour Party. Well, we must know and ask the hard question, were they related to the perpetrators? We know that Pakistani society is tribal. We know that they have a lot of cousin marriages among them. So it's very likely that they were related. We don't know that, but we must ask these questions. If we find out that we had some sort of tribal loyalty, well, we must act, because no community, no religion, no institution, and no ideology is above the safety of our children.
Absolutely spot on. Paola, thank you very much indeed for your time. Paola Diana, Executive Chair of the Women's Policy Centre. And you know what? Even if, there will doubtless be some councillors and those that work locally because of the areas we're talking about who are also of Pakistani origin, whether there's a correlation to that. But it wouldn't, even if there isn't, the same crime, frankly, has been committed here. whether it's some white pasty bloke of a counsellor or whether it's somebody of Pakistani origin. Either way, these girls were ignored and they closed down genuine debate and they refuted any narrative that there was a correlation here, that there was any kind of connection, there was anything to see here. If nothing else, you're talking about crimes that are systemically and on an industrial scale basic racism, for goodness sake. You know, these guys of Pakistani origin, of Muslim origin, who believed that young white girls, because they dressed a bit like that, right, and they liked to go out and have a drink, were, quote, asking for it. They were up for it. It's almost what God put them on the earth for. They believe that. So if nothing else, you've got clear-cut cases of absolute abject, you know, horrendous, hate-fueled racism going on against young children who, by the way, have done absolutely nothing wrong. So you got that. Even that, you'd have thought some of these counsellors would have jumped out their chairs like left-wing meerkats usually do and got a little bit uppity about it. But they feared there might be a race riot. There might be something might go on. And, you know, we don't, the last thing we want to do is create this idea. And, of course, you know, most Pakistani men would be unlikely to join in or even endorse this, was the word on the street. And I get that. I don't think for one second that the fella around the corner from me who runs the grocery store would in any shape or form be going, I think what happened there was fine. That doesn't in any way remove the brutal, irredeemable reality that on a large, large scale over many, many years, one group of people from one background and culture abused another group of people predominantly from one background and a culture. Why would you not connect those and go, right, what's the connection here? I think we need to look at the connection. I think we need to look at men who've come from a country whose, you know, culturally rules, regulations, cultural norms, ideas, views of the West, how you see, you know, certainly Western women, mostly young white girls. There were some exceptions. There were some black girls in the list of victims as well, but it was mostly young white girls. What they saw in that culture, what their own original conservative values told them, why it was okay to do what they did to these girls, and somehow felt that, you know, in some cases, and this did come out in evidence in a couple of cases where some of these men believed their faith did give them the green light. I don't really think actually it's about being Muslim. I've never thought that was the predominant thing. I think their heritage and their country of origin would be problematic. If you take people from one culture and drop them into another culture, then you might get problems. Some of these people were British born, but let's just take that point for argument's sake. And this was the upshot in one aspect of those problems, and they were life-changing, and the victims are plentiful. There are so many of them, and many would never have recovered. Some didn't actually recover, as it turns out. 0344 499 1000. Do you believe an inquiry will get to the truth? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
These perverse scientists are working on developing nuclear weapons to destroy the Jewish state and, for that matter, the rest of the world, because Iran, that has intercontinental ballistic missiles, plus nuclear warheads. Right now, enough uranium for 10 nuclear warheads is a menace not only for Israel, but for the whole world. And I think Israel's doing the very thankless job of fighting Iran on this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Brian says, Paola Diana, what a woman, more power to her and her team. Indeed, that's Brian in Durham. Thank you, Brian, for that. Mark in Suffolk regarding rape gangs. The fact that a 10-year-old girl could be labelled a prostitute should be reason enough for a national inquiry and see people in authority charged and prosecuted. It's outrageous. Shame on anyone involved or complicit. Do you know the bit that I find really confusing about this? If we were talking about, I don't know, the 1960s or 70s or something, when people, believed, the woman in a short skirt, she might be young, but, she see the length of that skirt and she liked the boys, that attitude was prevalent back then. But this isn't. This is like in the 2000s. Right? This is quite recent, when I thought we'd learnt all those lessons about strange stereotypes. But it's true, as Mark says, the fact that you can call a kid a prostitute and look how she was dressed and, she liked to drink. And the biggest crime to be seen when you find a couple of young teenagers in the homes of 3 or 4 middle-aged men. The biggest crime is the fact they were drinking underage, not what are they doing in the homes of 4 45-year-old men. Let's go to Caroline down in London. Caroline, what are your thoughts on this? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. Okay,
Pleasure.
so I've got a question I want to put out there.
Yeah.
I personally am sick to my back teeth about inquiries. If it was you or me or whoever, we would be arrested and put on trial and done. This is going to go on for years. It's going to cost millions, and I guarantee no counsellor, no social worker, no politician, no police officer, one will come down, will get arrested and put into jail. And I wonder how many of the perpetrators will get caught and put to...
Well, the problem with this, Caroline, is that, of course, it's an inquiry, not a court case. So you'd need to then have, after the inquiry, you'd then have to have individual police forces going, right, we're now going to investigate this person. And I'm assuming that's not the work of a moment, right?
But that's what we need. We need a whole new police force, countrywide.
You almost do.
Deal with this.
Because we just had an email, a tweet in, Caroline, on this point from Dan, who says the focus of this grooming inquiry must be to expose those that covered it up. There's plenty of information in the public domain as to what happened. We need to nail those at the highest level who allowed it to go unchallenged for so long. And that's fine. That's what you're saying. That's what Dan is saying. That's what I'm saying. But that's probably not what an inquiry is going to do. It might establish, this council or that council, but I doubt whether you're going to get someone, say, that Mickey Smithers, who worked at Rotherham Council for Children's Services, literally said this. I'm not sure.
No, exactly. So all that money is going to be wasted. It's going to be a complete scam, a sham, just like the Iraq inquiry, etc., etc., etc. This country, there's no law here anymore. One of the girls had to wait 24 years to see her perpetrator go to prison.
Wow.
24 years, Ian.
24 years when people were, as you rightly say, they were flagging this and even giving names and saying, no, you see him over there, that literally him over there. Go and talk to him because he's the person that actually attacked me, and nothing would get done. And listen, Caroline, I'm going to move on just to get more comment on what is unforgivable about this is that we're not talking about little grey areas of tittle-tattle where it was clearly, a very, very big, long stretch of the imagination that, some 13-year-old girl, let's face it, she was in care, bit troubled, probably lies a bit, likes a drink, does a vodka, smokes 20 a day, does a few Class A's, really, we're not going to listen. But that would be bad enough to not be listened to, because you might be drunk, as I once heard a judge say in an amazing court case that I was sitting in the press gallery for. There's lots of reasons why somebody might lie, and there's lots of reasons why people who look as if they lie don't lie. And just because you're drunk doesn't mean to say you're not telling the truth or that you're not a victim. Just because you've sniffed something you shouldn't have done doesn't mean you're not a victim. There's loads of other variables to this. But the fact is this: it wasn't one girl, right? It wasn't one girl. It was loads and loads and loads of girls that have come forward on this. Les is in Cheshire. What have you got for us, Les? Afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian. Thanks for taking the call.
Pleasure.
Maggie Oliver, she wrote a book called Fighting for Justice, based on the fact that she was a whistleblower anyway in Rochdale in regards to the police and the cover-up there. And she was given a dameship. Now, okay, fine. I agree with what she said. I bought her book and I've read it many times. And the thing is, she was fighting it for in Rochdale. Mm-hmm. Now, in 2018, there was a court case in Leeds that showed that Pakistani men were actually grooming girls. And when they were let out of court, because of they were waiting for sentence, there was one person out there from the mainstream media who wanted to interview them, and he got called far right. And you know who that person is?
Go on.
Stephen Laxley Lennon.
Yeah, he wasn't the only person. There were loads of others. I've got to tell you, Les. I mean, he came onto it a lot later down the story, and I'm not suggesting he didn't feel very passionately about it, but I think there's a bit of an urban myth there.
It was going on in Luton.
Yeah, no, I don't dispute where it was going on. It was going on in lots of places.
Right, getting back to Rochdale and Maggie Oliver, she was like in Rochdale and she brought this. You know, the person who was an MP for 20 years in Rochdale.
Go on.
He was a former Labour MP and then he went to the Liberal Democrats.
Which one are you talking about?
Cyril Smith.
Oh, Cyril Smith, yeah. Well known now as to Cyril Smith's background, which makes a lot of sense as to why he was hardly a vocal voice on this.
Exactly, and the fact is he wasn't convicted of any crime.
Yeah.
Although people wanted to go and say that he abused me and abused it, and they were young men. Now,
yeah, they were young boys, indeed.
Keir Starmer was the chief prosecutor from 2008 and 2013.
Yep.
Right. So, in actual fact, he's really proud of being that prosecutor. So why didn't the prosecutor after him go for these people?
Well, look, I'm not going to try and second-guess what a prosecutor does. I'm sure Starmer would find the answer on that specific question. I couldn't even second-guess it. Les, I've got to move. The news is literally upon us. Time now on Talk is 2 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. It is 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. It is Talk, the home of common sense. We are talking about the findings of a report on grooming gangs will be outlined by the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper a little later this afternoon in the Commons. We'll cross live when that happens. Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirming there will now be a public inquiry after previously saying that those calling for one were jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. That's a direct quote. And then, of course, all the other ministers around all said, no, we don't need another inquiry until today, when they're going, yeah, we do need an inquiry. So there we are. That's where we're at. Also, we'll talk more on that and take more of your calls. Also this afternoon, Iran has threatened to abandon a treaty aimed at preventing the development of nuclear weapons as rocket fire with Israel continues into its fourth day. This really doesn't look pretty, but is there any hope of this coming to a swift conclusion? And over 100,000 new electric vehicle chargers will be installed across the UK as part of a £300 million investment in EV infrastructure, with the aim to have 300,000 in place by the end of the decade. Is there any chance of achieving this? And are you buying now into the electric revolution? We'll have more on that as well. 0344 499 1000. Thank you to Jib, who says, I think a nod to Andrew Norfolk on this would be correct. Andrew Norfolk was the Times... he was the Times reporter who pretty much, I'm tempted to say before anyone else. I think there were a couple of other journalists as well that was touching this back in 2010, 2011, and sadly he only died about a month ago, I think I'm right in saying, something like that. But Andrew Norfolk did incredible work on this, and the Times were splashing on this as well for, you know, on certain aspects of the story. He wasn't entirely a lone voice, which is why our previous caller, I'm not disputing people who tried to kind of highlight it, but sometimes with stories such as this, you need a good, coherent voice that is kind of so journalistically switched on and savvy that you could trust every word they print or every line that they come out with. And Andrew Norfolk was definitely that man. Didn't seem to go anywhere, though, at the time, having said that, because this has been... I mean, that was a decade and a half that he was writing about this stuff. Theo Usherwood is with us to help us out with this and the other big stories of the day. I mean, it's only when I talk about years, Theo, like 2010, when Andrew Norfolk was writing this stuff, you think, how did this... It's now a decade and a half later.
And he was attacked for doing so.
Yes.
He was pilloried as being, you know, a mouthpiece for the far right. He had his... you know, there were attempts by certain politicians and those on the left to absolutely assassinate his character.
Yeah.
But the work he was doing was phenomenal. Yeah, there were others, but he was the one that was handed the files and revealed the absolutely monstrous detail of what was going on in these towns. An absolutely incredible journalist, and sadly passed away so young.
Indeed, yeah, he was only 60.
60 on a routine appointment to see the doctor, and he suffered some health complications and died. And you know, those are, Andrew Norfolk is the sort of journalist that I think most journalists aspire to be.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, he's the one, no fanfare, no glitz or glamour to the man, but very understated and so diligent in the way he went about his reporting and giving a voice and telling the stories of so many young girls and young women who'd been abused by these vile gangs.
And it did lead, and I don't know whether this was part of the Jay inquiry, possibly it was, that his evidence led to where 1,400, they certainly established about 1,400 girls. This is just in that one area, 1,400 victims.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as part of today's announcement, it's been said the National Crime Agency is going to now look again at around 800 cold cases which have not led to prosecution. So they're going to look again at these cases to see whether actually it is possible now.
Yeah.
You know, I think given where we're at now, how many people, Dame Louise Casey, when her report is going to be published in a couple of hours or so, when that's published, it will again say that for fear of being accused of being racist, there was decisions not to to hold back investigations into the police, or the police made held back in their investigations. Social services held back in their investigations, didn't get to the truth of what was going on because of it involved, and Dame Louise Casey is going to make this patently clear in her report. Predominantly these were cases perpetrated, abuse cases perpetrated by men of Pakistani heritage, and for so long this aspect of the case was glossed over at best, or just simply buried, because the authorities didn't want to be accused of being racist.
But it's crazy, because you would, even an episode of Columbo would tell you, you'd look at commonality, whether it turned out that they were all football fans of one particular club, or they'd all come from one particular neck of the woods.
But this is the irony. There seems to be this resistance to recording the ethnicity of perpetrators when they go to court. So Alexis J, I was looking this up just before I joined you. Alexis J made this recommendation back in 2022. It still isn't being enacted. Dame Louise Casey is going to make the same recommendation today, where you have cases where you have widespread child abuse and you have individuals before court. It's absolutely imperative that the ethnicity of those who've been found guilty is recorded, even if they haven't been found guilty. Even if it's a case that's got to court and the case has collapsed for whatever reason, it's absolutely imperative that the ethnicity is recorded, and that's key, because then you can use all of that data to spot a trend, and the trend is obvious. But if you're just looking at one case and it's in one area and you're not recording the ethnicity, and you have dozens and dozens of cases, it's impossible then to go back and say, well, let's see if there's any commonality or any, because we haven't recorded the ethnicity and it's not recorded.
I mean, if you
that's one of the things that's been missing in all of these
100%.
cases.
And if you look at, I mean, just going back to the Andrew Norfolk aspect, when he was looking into Rotherham, and 1,400 girls over a 16-year period.
White British girls.
White British girls. And if you extrapolated that figure and looked at it in other towns, if we were to, and this I think is a conservative, I'm throwing this out there not to be hyperbolic or mischievous, let's say there were 5,000 victims across the country, and many people would say it's much bigger than that. 5,000 victims. I mean, just let that settle for a second. 5,000 victims. One would assume something in the region of the same amount of perpetrators of that ballpark. Some would have perhaps abused multiple girls. Just looking at it like that, that is massive. And if there was a commonality in those perpetrators, you'd look at that and say, OK, these are men. Pakistani, also interestingly from a very specific part of Pakistan as well. So that's, again, adds further kind of a point of discussion or interest or investigation. So why would you not look at that and say, well, what is it about that group of men and that group of girls? You'd naturally correlate that.
Because, and this is what's been found time and time again to be the case, that the authorities don't want to be accused of being racist, because they're not recording the data. So they can, they've got a fairly, you'd have thought they'd have had a fairly clear idea of the, Andrew Norfolk, I remember him, he was talking about it, it was in his obituary, which was in the Times, and he was asked, why did he decide to go and investigate? And it was because he was listening to a radio report, and the same surnames kept on cropping up, the same, Pakistani heritage surnames kept turning up. And he suddenly thought, hang on a moment, I can't just go over this, I can't just gloss it, I've got to go back and investigate this particular case. And so he goes back and investigates. Now, the authorities would have heard the same names, right? They'd have heard the same names, but instead of somebody thinking, well, you'd have thought anybody with any common sense would go, OK, I'm going to go back now and I'm going to look at this, just like Andrew Norfolk decided to go and investigate it. That was the reason why they didn't record the data, because they didn't want to then face an accusation that they're zeroing in on an individual's ethnicity, because that would then deem them to be racist.
And one counts, Rotherham in this case, you've got 1,400 girls, possibly more, and many people over the years, whether they were the girls or people who'd been tipped off or individuals, were telling either law enforcement or agencies or social services, education, counsellors and councils, and nothing happened.
It was worse than that. I mean, in one case, the father turned up to find his daughter being abused. I mean, he had to go down and break the door down to get his daughter back. And then you had cases where social services, I think it was one case, wasn't it, where a social service actually turned up at the supposed wedding, or something. Am I right in saying of a girl who was being, abused by this man and then forced into this horrendous situation? Yeah. It was absolute complicity.
Extraordinary. We will see what Yvette Cooper says a little later on. One would assume she might well then say, and this inquiry will be led by, and then they will announce usually somebody of the judicial
So what's going to happen is that we already know there's going to be one local inquiry in Oldham, and we know the government's announced 4 other local inquiries, but we don't know where they're going to be. And what's going to be established, and it's not quite the national inquiry that it's being billed at, is a commission. And the commission is going to oversee the local inquiries. The important detail is, and this is different to what was being proposed originally back in January by the government in response to this scandal blowing up again, is that this commission is going to have legal powers. So if a social worker or if a police officer is refusing to attend, then they can compel them to do so and to give evidence. And this commission is also going to have the ability to go to a particular area, but it is going to be time limited, and say you need to hold an inquiry, even if the local authority in that area doesn't want to hold an inquiry. So it can force that. So there is more teeth to it, but what it is not is an overarching
this
inquiry.
is, as you say, there's an umbrella of the other inquiries that we're already going to have.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Let's move to this story, always on the radar as well. Keir Starmer apparently going to beg Emmanuel Macron to stop some more boats. I mean, we've sort of got to this stage at the moment, it seems, there, where we have this extraordinary situation where there's £500 million gone to the French, and there's all sorts of other initiatives, and each day we see more weird evidence of the French police standing there at a beach while people literally paddle past them and go, no, once skin has touched water, we can't go in because it's dangerous. It's like, well, they're literally just paddling in some not even shallow water. It's not even above their toe level.
But this tactic of begging the French or giving however many million quid to the French to stop these crossings at source at the beach clearly isn't working. Smashing the gangs. I know there has been some successful work done by the Home Office, but it's by no means stopping this vile trade in human beings across the English Channel. That is the way it. What has happened is, that Keir Starmer has got rid of the Rwanda scheme at the moment. There is no backup plan to the Rwanda scheme. He went to Albania to try and persuade the Albanians to do a deal where they would have some sort of return hubs where people could be sent once all of their appeals to remain in this country and asylum have been done and dusted. There's also talk of, changing the way, or trying to force judges to change the way they interpret the European Convention on Human Rights, so that actually only in the most extreme cases where it's obvious that an individual is going to be subject to death or torture, can a judge apply the ECHR to a particular case to allow somebody to remain in this country. Ultimately, there has to be a deterrent. You have to stop this at source by making Britain a non-viable destination, so that the gangs know, and those who are paying the gang members money either in advance or arriving in this country and then working on the black market to pay off their debt in order to pay for the crossing. You have to show that actually you need to demonstrate that they are not going to be able to stay in this country, and they have no chance of staying in this country. But at the moment there isn't the setup, and what any hope that there had been a setup with the Rwanda scheme that was binned on the second day in office by Keir Starmer, and that's why this continues to happen.
It's the usual thing. It's already getting rid of something, but you tend to need to replace it with something, and quite quickly.
But Keir Starmer, when he scrapped the Rwanda scheme, yes, they'd spent 700 million on it, and yes, I think it deported one person, if that, to Rwanda, and they went voluntarily.
Wasn't that a volunteer? Yes, that's right. And I think not just a volunteer. I think they also got paid as well.
Yeah. So look, it didn't wash as a scheme, but
it hadn't got up and running yet.
It hadn't got
really.
it. Yeah. And I think that and this is what we're going to hear, particularly I think from the Tories have launched a review of it Nigel Farage is pretty clear about where he is. The blocker on all of this is the ECHR, and until we find a way to reform the ECHR. And by the way, the one thing I would say on this is we're not alone in our concerns about it. The Germans, they're facing a significant problem as well with this particular issue. That actually, if we can reform the ECHR, then it is possible to make the changes necessary. But at the moment, you know, we're projected to surpass 50,000, which would be a record number of migrants crossing the English Channel this year. It's looking out the window. It's sunny.
It's like 26 degrees out
26
there.
degrees. It'll be calm in the English Channel for the next week or so, and I think we're going to see an ever increasing number of people. And it's 4 million. £4 million a day we're spending on accommodation. It's an unsustainable situation.
Completely. Final one here, Theo, just briefly on this, if we could. Sir Keir Starmer says Labour must press ahead with welfare reform. This is the idea to save £5 billion quid by 2030. It's not being popular. It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at Starmer, if you're on the right politically, you look at Starmer and say this mad old lefty, here he is. If you're on the left of Labour, like the Corbyn wing, you see Keir Starmer as sort of more right-wing than Kemi Badenoch.
Yes,
I know that's not hard, by the way.
I think what's interesting about this particular story coming out as it is right now is that there is this situation Keir Starmer's got himself into where he's U-turned on the winter fuel allowance. He's U-turned on this. He's U-turned on this inquiry because, of course, he's had to agree with Dame Louise Casey, and he's trying to say, on this welfare reform on disability benefits, which of course the reform is going to save, the hope is it's going to save around £5 billion. He is prepared. He is not prepared to waver. He's not prepared to change his mind because, of course, he doesn't want to get himself a reputation as being a Mr. U-turn.
No, I think unfortunately that's past now. He's stuck with that one. Theo, thank you. Always good to see you. Theo Usher with us here on the programme. Over to you. 0344 499 1000 87222 if you're sending a message. 2 now. This is Talk.
The idea that she was going to come back and be, you know what, I'll be Starmer's whipping boy on this. I'll be the woman that says we don't need an inquiry. And when it was so blindingly obvious that we did need an inquiry, just from the facts that were publicly available at the time. So this idea that she's suddenly uncovered some new mystery about the fact that hundreds of Pakistani origin men raped, drugged, abused thousands of British girls, that's not new information.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So, just gone 2. Gary says the last thing we need is a long, drawn-out inquiry that after 4 years concludes that lessons need to be learnt with the establishment, then congratulating themselves on a job well done. This inquiry shouldn't waste time on what happened or why it was allowed to happen, because we know that. What I want this inquiry to do is name names and have the power to require independent police forces to investigate those names that it uncovers, because as things stand at the moment, I got a harsher punishment for doing 35 miles per hour in a 30 last year than hundreds, if not thousands, of child rapists or those involved in covering up those rapes got. And here is a suggestion for the person selected to run this inquiry on how to get the ball rolling. Announced that I'm coming for anyone and everyone who had any involvement in these crimes or the cover-ups, and the first ones who come forward to provide evidence that leads to prosecutions and convictions will be spared the harshest of punishments. Trust me, it will be a real fight to get to the front of the queue. That's brilliant. I wonder, maybe that would work. I thought about this today, almost exactly what Gary's just said. I wonder there's going to be people there now, probably retired, maybe, you know, living, you know, in a nice beach house in Skegness, or maybe they've gone down to Marbella or something, thinking, blimey, I was working there then. Yeah, I was one of those who said there was nothing to see here. They're coming for you. Or are they? That's the point. Are they? What we don't want, as Gary said, is 4 years of going, yeah, well, this department or this council. No, we want to know, right, Mick Smithers, he was in charge of social services. That man covered up like a flipping gravedigger. Get him in the dock. Investigate that man, because he's partly responsible, because he facilitated it. He allowed it to carry on. And not just that, he then created a culture of denial so that anything else that happened subsequently was then also denied. If the head honcho is denying something, then others will follow suit as well. We need the whistleblowers, and we certainly need people. But the problem is, as I'm sure Gary and others know, it's not a criminal inquiry. It's just an inquiry as to what happened. But will it lead to some level of criminality? Adam is in Nottingham. What have you got for us, Adam? Afternoon.
Hi, yeah. All
Hi.
I can tell you is my own experiences with this.
Yeah.
And I lived in Ice Green from my late 20s till beginning of my 40s. And we saw so much stuff and nobody did anything. We know these things, everything you've mentioned, these houses, grooming houses, where the women would go in with queues of blokes going into the houses, happened. We saw this, and not everyone knew about it. Even the kids knew about it. I talked to down the street, the 12-year-olds knew. They would tell me about this house. So, yeah, I've heard that, you know, and all this. And you see the women leaving these.
When you say women, are we talking children here?
Girls, we're talking girls, yes, sorry. Yeah, we're talking 14, 15-year-old girls. And that wasn't it's not the only example I can give you. There was a van parked right outside my house with three, I don't, Pakistani, I don't know, Asian blokes of Asian descent, and they were hanging out the window chatting to these two girls that I know to be 14 because I knew their brothers, saying some, you know, commenting on their tight tops or something, and saying, are you going to give me your number? And I saw all this. They saw me, drove off, 15 minutes later, returned back to the same spot.
Wow.
You know, so they are doing
the problem is those some of those, you know, you're talking about usually, not exclusive, but usually quite vulnerable girls who've come from, you know, fairly disruptive houses, broken homes, sometimes in the care system. Now, for a period of time, this is where the confusion is. Those girls thought, this is great, you know, we can have cigarettes, we can get drugs, we can get drink, and all I've got to do is spend half an hour with him in a room. And this is listening to some of these girls. This is, by the way, it's not the story of all of those girls, but some of them, for a moment, thought that they were adults. You know, they were being they didn't realise they were being sucked into a world of abuse. But even that's not good enough, because they were 14, they were 13, they were 12. It's not good enough, right? You've got to say, actually, sorry, they were kids. And whatever they thought they were doing, or some of them thought they were doing, isn't it great? I'm not even at school. I can go and get drunk while my mate are doing double maths. You know, that might have been good for some for half a minute. It was abuse. And yet local authorities, law enforcement, counsellors, kind of what I've just said, they ran with. Oh, no, they were prostitutes. 10-year-old prostitute doesn't exist.
It's absolute madness. Can I just tell you one thing, not even concerning kids, but concerning my ex-wife, she was a girlfriend at the time, and everything, the attitude, just from a position of attitude. We had a Muslim gentleman in the shop next door to us, and he said something what I would consider inappropriate to her. And we knew him, you know, he was a decent guy and stuff. I went into the shop, sat down with him. Did you say this? Because she's a bit upset about it. Can you not say that? And he just blew up on me with a torrent of abuse about white women being whores. Your women are whores, our women are holy. You know, we don't care about these women. And just the attitude, I was sat there and I sat there.
That's precisely I'm sorry you had to go through that. Man alive. But that is precisely the problem. Some of these guys really believe that's what Western, the kind of loose morals of Western people, particularly Western girls. So all these girls are up for it, and look, they're young and they're innocent, they think, but they're not, and that's, why God put them almost on this earth. That's how deeply they held that belief. And this, Adam, I'm going to move on, Adam, for no other reason. I want to get some more comment on. But it's that, and somehow that belief took hold of the thinking of councils and cops and teachers who went, you've got to understand, these guys, they come from a culture that what? No. So what's on trial here, to a degree, is part, and I emphasise the word part, of a kind of the sort of multicultural experiment that we've been wanging on about forever, but certainly in the last few weeks, for obvious reasons, this has come up in terms of, side-by-side policing, two-tier, all of that stuff. And even if you throw out all the kind of mischief and the exaggeration, you are still left with some very basic facts on all of this, that certain aspects of multiculturalism, and some would say all aspects, but I would say certain would be reasonable, simply don't really work. That doesn't work, and we've got the obvious evidence for it. And if you've got 1,400 victims in Rotherham alone, and I would say double that would be, fairly concerned. That's just one town, one area, okay? How many victims are we talking about? How many young girls who were raped and abused? 5,000, 10,000? I mean, 5,000, some would say, is a conservative estimate. 5,000 victims of rape and sexual abuse. So one would assume there is almost as many, possibly more, perpetrators of that. Walking the street with that view and that belief. Pat is in Suffolk. Pat, what have you got for us? Hi.
Good afternoon, Ian. A question that I have never heard anybody ask, particularly to the authorities in Rotherham and places like this, is what would your response be if it had been young Muslim girls being groomed and raped by a gang of white men, particularly English white men?
There would have been an absolute fallout, wouldn't
exactly.
there? The world would have lost its mind. Local authorities, teachers would have lost their mind.
Yeah.
We cannot put up with this level of racism. Yeah. They would have lost their mind. It would have been one of the biggest inquiries we'd ever seen.
But why the other way? And it goes the other way. Oh, well, these girls were obviously slags, prostitutes, come from bad homes.
Yeah.
But, if you denigrated a young Muslim girl, you'd have riots in the streets.
It's the fact we're talking about this in this way, Pat, it's quite unbelievable, right? I mean, this should be the most shocking thing we've ever discussed, that lots of girls were raped and abused, and those that were in power to help them did nothing.
Yeah. Still, the Labour Party are still denying it, aren't they, really?
Well, yeah, and there was a couple of months ago, I think we did play the clip at the time, there was a Liberal Democrat MP as well, who said something absolute. She was outraged that they would want an inquiry, because she was saying that some of these people only want an inquiry because it's about Muslim men, and that was their thinking. And do you know what? That is part of this story, that it's about Muslim men of Pakistani background. That is a part of this story. Doesn't mean all Muslim men, doesn't mean all Pakistani men. It's just in this particular story, that is the commonality. You'd have to be... You should get fired if you didn't make that connection. Any law enforcement, any lawyer, anyone who knows anything about putting a case together will go, right, that's the first port of call, right? We've got two irredeemable realities here, where they're from, their ethnicity and their religion. Right, we might... at the end of it go, do you know what? Actually, their religion wasn't the factor. Where they came from, where they were raised, was that. Who knows? But you'd raise it. And if you didn't raise it, you should be kicked out. Listen, Pat, I've got to move. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. More coming from you next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Adrian, who says, police, MPs, social workers knew these vermin were raping these girls. They should be named and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. They were negligent in a public office and deserve to pay, strip their pensions, jail them. And that's going to be the interesting thing. And Adrian is absolutely bang on about that. But how do you get from the inquiry to that bit? Because the inquiry is going to take a while. Let's hope it doesn't take... I mean, the J inquiry took 7 years. That's unacceptable. That can't happen. But this is going to take, what, 2? Even if you did 1? You'd then have to throw up some information that then led to a prosecution. And that prosecution is likely to be sort of failure in a public office, almost kind of... It's probably one of those horrendous things, but there's more of a civil offence than a criminal offence, if that makes sense. As horrendous as that sounds. Because that would be the defence. They will say, well, no, it wasn't me on my own. And that's if the inquiry even names anybody. We do need specific counsels, obviously. Then we need the departments and the heads of the departments. And that surely has to be taken on this and then investigated afterwards. But that will come later, one assumes, if at all. What we don't want is the inquiry to just sort of generically name the council. But again, it's an inquiry, it's not a criminal case. But after that, then maybe somebody can diligently go and say, right, OK, you've named the council, so it's that department. Now we can find out who was running it at the time. Maybe that's for someone else. But you'd like to think somebody somewhere would do something. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more comment from you on the way. Loads to get through here this afternoon. Oh, by the way, including this. Over 100,000 electric vehicle chargers will be installed across the UK. Hurrah! Yeah. It's all part of a £300 million push to boost EV infrastructure and support drivers who don't have access to private driveways or home chargers. Because, you know, they always, if you're in a block of flats, you're a bit knackered. The goal, the bigger goal, is to get to 300,000 chargers by 2030. At the moment, there's 80,000 in place. There's a lot of, they've got to build a load of houses and a load of chargers. Let's speak with Lee Davey, vlogger and electric car owner. Lee, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good, nice to have you with us. Listen, I mean, do you, as an electric car owner, do you find, other than when you're charging at home, that you can't find somewhere to charge your vehicle? And you're savvy on this stuff because you know where everything is.
I found that and I hate to say this, I found the charging network has got better in the last 4 years, but on the flip side of it, not as fast as it needs to be. You still find a lot of charging points where they are busy, or the cables have been cut for the copper. So you end up not being able to charge your car.
Yes, and there's the problem, isn't it? If you, I mean, if you don't have your home charging available to you, that's where the real problem lies, yeah? Because I think a lot of people do just charge on their driveway, but if you haven't got that option, then you have a problem.
Well, a lot of people don't have a driveway, and also there's more than one car in families these days, so you're fighting between the charger that you've got. You have to take it in turns, so it's quite easy to say, yeah, my car's charging while you're asleep, but it depends how many car owners you've actually got in the family.
Yeah.
And also the government is saying they're promising 100,000 new EV chargers for England. We know that won't happen. They've been promising this for year on end, and it just never happens. It never comes to fruition.
So what's the? I mean, the obvious answer is we just need more of them. If everyone's going to be, or the idea or the ambition is everyone is going to be driving an EV, then you simply need as many electric points as you've currently got petrol pumps, right?
Well, the obvious answer really is just to keep petrol and do away with electric cars. But unless, and I said this, unless for around town, I admit, for around town, tiny little car like the new Renault 5 EV or whatever, or the Hyundai Insta, fantastic cars for around town. Long distances, EVs. Personally, I think it's a long way in the future. And also, by the way, the government are promising these EV chargers. You've got to ask yourself, why have they removed their EV chargers from Westminster? Because it's a danger of fire.
Wow. So is that right? So the Westminster, they did have EV chargers. Are you talking about not within Parliament or just in the borough?
Within the Houses of Parliament,
right?
They've removed their EV chargers from there because they are a fire hazard.
Ah, now that's interesting, because that one comes up every now and again, doesn't it, Lee? This question of, is there a potential danger around EV charging? I don't want to, inflame things here, no pun intended, or somehow scare people, but there is definitely a question mark over that.
There is a question mark, and the evangelists will also argue that sitting on a tank of petrol is also dangerous and flammable. So there's two sides to each story. We tend to get a lot of information out there at the moment where they'll show you an electric car on fire, and then it comes down the line where it's not actually an electric car, it's a diesel car or whatever. And there's a lot of that. Personally, I think, obviously, we're talking about the EV chargers. We are years and years away from having all these chargers installed, and they keep promising it. If they're looking at 2035 to not being able to sell any petrol or diesel cars from then, they've got to install, and they've really got to ramp up the installation of these chargers if they want to hit 2035.
And they'd have to be super fast chargers as well, right?
They'd have to be super fast chargers, and I have to say, I hate to say this because I've had one for 4 years, and I've learned a lot in the 4 years that I've had the car. No, I know pardon the pun, the pluses and the minuses of it, the negatives and the positives. The infrastructure has improved, but it hasn't improved quick enough. And also, EV technology has improved. I have the Porsche Taycan, the Gen 1. The Generation 2 is a lot quicker to charge, and it also gets you further on a charge. You can get just over 300 miles. So the technology is improving, and the network needs to improve as well, and the government needs to put that in place. Otherwise, they're going to have to put back 2035, personally.
Yeah. Well, the other day, the weekend, I went to go and get some petrol in local Tesco petrol station. The queue was round the flipping corner. It was just one of those days where clearly the weather was reasonable. Everyone had the same idea at the same time, which is always annoying because you like to think you're the only person that needs to fill your car up with petrol. So I thought, it doesn't matter, I'll come back later. It wasn't massively urgent. Now, the petrol station doesn't have EV charging. The Tesco car park has maybe half a dozen bays, I think, that you can charge. But if you replaced all of those gas-guzzling cars with EVs, where would they have been going at exactly the same... Where would they have to go at exactly the same time? If 27 cars wanted to recharge, they wouldn't have anywhere to go.
I think it's an interesting one, that, because I don't know what has happened, but when I first started doing videos about EVs and I was charging, the chargers were always busy and you always ended up waiting.
Yeah.
But recently, there's less and less that I come across, that less and less. I find now there are more available chargers than there was 4 years ago. But it still isn't without its problems, because bank holidays, etc., and busy times like that, you'll find that the chargers are busy and it's very difficult to get onto a charger. And if you're with a family and you've got kids in the back of the car, the last thing you want to be doing is hanging around waiting to charge. And there's still points where I was in Windermere the other week, and I was waiting at a charger. It was raining, because you also get wet while you're charging your car because there's no canopies over the top of them. They still need to look into that. When you go to when you fill it with petrol, you don't get wet through. You got a canopy over. You go
VIP treatment.
VIP treatment. They're still fighting at EV charge points where people are waiting and somebody pushes in because there's no sort of like queue or anything as such. People are waiting in car parks and they start having a go at each other.
Wow.
So it does need sorting out, and we need a lot more of them.
Yeah, 100%. If this dream is going to take off. Lee, thank you. Lee Davey, he is, of course, a vlogger and electric car owner. Thank you to him. Well, it kind of has taken off. There's no doubt about that. You can't move for electric cars. I just wonder if, if simultaneously you all pitched up suddenly at a petrol station like I did at the weekend, but 27 people wanted electricity rather than petrol, what would they do? Because they don't exist in that vicinity. In the main supermarket car park, as I say, there's, I think, off the top of my head, there's half a dozen charging points. But that would mean putting 27 cars into a car park to charge the car, which would cause a bit of chaos in the car park, because it's a car park ultimately for the supermarket, so there'd be that. But also, to charge your electric vehicle, right, it takes a longer period of time than it does to fill up with petrol. So where does that sit? I'm interested in the charge. Should we just call this the charging dilemma? Okay, if you've been and you are an EV owner, tell me about the charging dilemma. What happens when you're on a trip with the family? You're going to the beach for the day, or maybe it's a holiday, whatever it happens to be, and you think, well, I've got to stop on the, M6 or whatever to recharge. Unless you're on a super fast charge. How long does that take, a super fast charge? Is like fast like 20 minutes, whereas slow is like 2 hours 20 minutes. What's the deal there? Because I can imagine if it's the latter, that probably encroaches somewhat on your day. That would muddy the waters of your contentment levels at that point, I reckon. Suddenly, I've got to add 2 hours to my journey to charge the flipping car. Yeah, let's call it the charging dilemma. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to your points on this. Peter in Glasgow, on the EV issue. Peter, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Ian, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. What are your thoughts?
So I bought an EV 4 years ago. It's got less than 19,000 miles on the clock.
Yep.
Bought it for 60 grand. Now worth 20 grand, and it's had a known catastrophic failure, and it's going to cost me 13 grand to fix.
No way. What sort of error? What's the failure, roughly, in layman's terms?
In layman's terms, it's got a pretty complex coolant system that is buggered
messed up with.
The battery pump.
So is this a known thing to the manufacturer, did you say?
Yeah, apparently in the UK they're trying to keep it a bit quiet, but in America they've extended the warranty to 10 years, so they know that it exists. And I'm now in a battle with them to pay for parts.
That's outrageous.
Yeah.
Do you
virtually scrap after 4 years?
Yeah, I mean these are the conflicting stories. I think a lot of people like listening to your story. You know, I buy a 60 grand car, 40 grand car, it's worth like a fifth of that within years. But you know, if you bought a mid-range Audi, it wouldn't be worth less than a fifth in the same period of time.
It's very sad. I mean, I've got no faith in an EV car. Like I was definitely going down that route.
Yeah. You thought I'm on board. I'll give this one a go.
And I definitely don't think I'll ever go down that route again.
Yeah, I hear it, Peter. Thank you. You speak for a lot of people, I think, because it's what I come back to on EVs. We don't have the frame of reference for them. You know, that whole thing of looking at a car and going, oh, right, it's 5 years old, it's probably worth this, or it's done this amount of miles, it's probably worth that. You can make those numbers work in your head, because that's how we've always done it. And I know this is about changing technology. I'm not some kind of Luddite here. I get it, but you're still left with the reality that most of us, if someone tells me there's an EV car and it's done 50,000 miles, is that good or bad? I have no idea. Is it good? I know what it is if it's a top-of-the-range Audi or Volvo or something, 50,000 miles. In today's world, for a car like that, it's probably going to be absolutely fine. In fact, it's great. It's 5 years old, it's done 10 grand a year, perfectly average, brilliant. EV, similar car, 50,000, no idea. Does that mean it's knackered? Is it ready? Has it got a 10k left? Has it got 2,300 million k left? I do not know. And I don't think most people do either. The charging dilemma, 0344 499 1000.
These perverse scientists are working on developing nuclear weapons to destroy the Jewish state and, for that matter, the rest of the world, because Iran, that have intercontinental ballistic missiles, plus nuclear warheads. Right now, enough uranium for 10 nuclear warheads is a menace not only for Israel, but for the whole world. And I think Israel's doing the very thankless job of fighting Iran on this.
The idea that she was going to come back and be, you know what, I'll be Starmer's whipping boy on this. Yeah. I'll be the woman that says we don't need an inquiry. And when it was so blindingly obvious that we did need an inquiry, just from the facts that were publicly available at the time. So this idea that she's suddenly uncovered some new mystery about the fact that hundreds of Pakistani origin men raped, drugged, abused thousands of British girls, that's not new information.
Those accountable, those responsible rather, for covering up these disgusting crimes simply because the perpetrators were mainly of Pakistani origin. They covered it up for that reason, and those people who covered this up, senior police officers in some cases, local council leaders, leaders of social services, they should be prosecuted and imprisoned for deliberately covering up these disgusting crimes because they cared more about so-called race or community relations.
Across the UK, on on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 10 to 3. Andy in Cornwall says 2 points on the rape gangs. Firstly, I think there needs to be a campaign to have as many girls or boys being abused now to come forward and report the crime with the guarantee that will be investigated and, where applicable, prosecuted to the full, whilst giving the children and the families the necessary protection. Stop any more abuse from now, not just keep hiding it. Secondly, I don't care if Starmer apologises. It proves that we are not far right. We are just, we're right as in correct. Yeah, spot on. And I think that's true. There will be lots of victims who now don't want to come forward, and this is not exclusive to this story. It happens, right? You know, it's 20 years on for some, maybe more, thinking, do I want to relive all of that? I got out of it, I changed my life, I moved to a different area. Do I want... There will be those people, and you have to respect the feelings of those people who have left it alone, and despite the trauma and the horror, they've moved on to a different life, to a new life, and going back is just not on the agenda. But there will be others who've never been heard before because they thought no one would listen to them, because they thought they're a small voice in a very big story, and each time they did try to maybe raise it a little bit with somebody who you might say is in authority, whether it's in law enforcement, teaching, council, social, whatever, every time they did raise it, they were told that, you know, well, you're probably best letting that go. You know what these lads are like, and, you know, you like a drink, didn't you? You know, you're like when you wore your low-cut tops and your short skirts. Yeah, I was 13, so can't really say that's my fault. But that's what they've been through. That's the bit that you'd like to think is changing. I'm staggered it's still... that was the case even in like 2000s. It's 2005, 2010, whatever, that people were still thinking like that. I thought that went out the window years before then, but apparently not. 0344 499 1000. Some really interesting, powerful comments coming through on this. By way of a crunching gear change, we are also talking about EVs and the charging dilemma. Sean in Bridlington says, don't forget those 27 cars queuing for petrol or diesel are coming and going every couple of minutes. In 15 minutes, those 27 cars could be like 100 cars. If a quick EV charge takes 30 minutes, imagine how many charges would be needed or how long the queues would be. That's the bit I don't get. I mean, it would take, what? Literally, if everybody, based on the one scenario, a Tesco petrol station at the weekend, 20-odd cars. I'm basing that on the fact that I know how big the thing, it was out on the road. If that was all electric, we'd be absolutely, yeah, there'd be a mini riot. Maybe not quite a riot, but you take the point. I'm going to talk to Elle on this one in just a second. Don't disappear. We've got the voice of doom, of course. Is it day 3? 3? It is day 3. Day 3. This is the political mystery voice. Very simple question. Who is this?
I can't guarantee that.
I think that's a stinker. I think that's really hard. Remember, you're usually looking for a politician, past or present, usually past, somebody who was once an MP, or somebody very closely linked to politics, but, you know, the former, I think. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
That's going to go on for about 9 months. No one's going to get this thing. I just feel it. It's too kind of, oh no. If you think you want to have a crack at that, 87222. Don't phone in though, because there is no prize. 87222. We'll tell you after the news at 3 o'clock if we get a right answer. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
87222. Let's go to Elle in West Yorkshire. How are you doing, Elle?
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Are you in an EV car?
No, but I was last year, and that's why I rang in.
Shocking.
There's a couple of... which is a lovely thing to drive, and I thought I'd made it having this thing. But then when you're a woman on your own, there's a couple of things that nobody tells you.
Go on.
So I was using it for work up and down the motorway, and sometimes you find yourself at a dodgy service station, 1 a.m, on your own, heading back home. I had to charge the car. So one thing, the bank of charges wasn't working, so I had to stand in the rain, like the last person said, and reset the bank on an emergency phone call with the charging providers, which was a little bit creepy on your own at 1 a.m.
Yep.
But what I realised was, once they got them up and running, and I was having a snooze in my locked car for 2 hours while I waited for the thing to charge, was as a slightly strange gentleman came towards the car, I realised I couldn't drive off because you're locked and tethered. So you can't, literally, even in an emergency, you couldn't back up and get yourself to safety because it locks into the car when you charge it.
So are you locked in the car?
Yeah, no, I always lock myself in because...
Yeah, no, I get that,
A man did once.
Yeah, even I do, and I'm a ninja superhero male, so yes, I always lock the car.
But the mechanism, when you lock into charge, it's not like a flimsy thing that you can just sort of pull away from. So in my car, anyway, it latches in mechanically.
Yeah.
And it's to stop people taking it out when you charge overnight on the street.
Of course it is.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But there's no way you could drive off. There's no way you could drive off.
No, not a chance.
You have to get out of the car and do it. So there's no internal button where you can unlock in an emergency and drive off with minimal damage.
So you had some weirdo just came up to the car while you were in it?
All the time when you're a woman. It happens quite a lot. But I realised with the electric car, you're physically stuck. In a normal car, you just drive off. You think, oh, he looks a bit dodgy. Just smile nicely and drive away in your car. You're physically attached. And if it's 1 a.m. and you're on your own and there's nobody around, and that I actually got rid of the car. I've got a basic, mechanical thing that I can, if something happens, I can just drive off.
What sort of car was it, the electric one?
I don't know if I want to say. It was one of those strange Chinese ones, but it was absolutely beautiful to drive, I have to say.
Yeah, well, the Chinese apparently are doing like great numbers in terms of electric vehicles, and sort of overtaking Tesla in quite a lot of areas, which is slightly overpriced and, now seen as something your granddad might have. I don't know.
Exactly.
There it is, Elle. Great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. I hadn't really... Do you know what? Maybe I come from another dimension of the human race. I'm always staggered. I know I get it because this stuff happens, and I've got enough female mates over the years that will tell you these stories. That there's Elle, charging her car at like 1 a.m, and some weird bloke's looking through the window. And what does that bloke think's going to happen? Right? Let's assume he's not an attacker. He's not going to break in and do anything horrendous. But at what point does a bloke think he's in with a chance? That's the bit that I like. So there's a woman's having a kip in the car. It's 1 o'clock. She's clearly run out of juice in the car. I know what I'll do. What a great moment in time to maybe try and pull. What a great 1 a.m. It's peeing hard with rain. Woman in car. I know what I'll showcase my best bits right now. Are you, love? Really? Really? Scale of 1 to 10. How much? How possible did you think it was she was going to go, oh, hello, here's my number, call me, we'll go out Saturday. Who are these weird blokes that do this kind of stuff? At what level do you reckon? Yeah, I think I'm in with a chance here. I reckon there's a good chance to just randomly approach a woman in a car in the middle of the night when it's pitch black and get a positive result. I mean, you've either got to be super deluded or you are so creepy you should be in jail already. One of the two. Don't go away if you're hanging on. 0344 499 1000. We've got the voice of doom, of course. Who is this?
I can't guarantee that.
87222 if you think you know. In the meantime, we're going to take a pause for some news headlines at 3.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Loads to get through in this last hour. Findings of that report on grooming gangs will be outlined by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. This should be in around about half an hour. You know what parliamentary time is like. It can shift around, but we will cross live to the House of Commons and bring you that statement from the Home Secretary when we hear it. Keir Starmer, of course, confirming earlier there will be a public inquiry after previously saying, by the way, that those calling for a public inquiry were jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. They were literally his words. He's changed his tune, it seems. I wonder what happened. Also this afternoon, Iran has threatened to abandon a treaty aimed at preventing the development of nuclear weapons as rocket fire with Israel continues into its fourth day. It's a worrying picture. What is the latest? We'll get some views on that in just a few moments' time. And as you've been hearing, over 100,000 new electric vehicle chargers will be installed across the UK, hopefully, fingers crossed, as part of a £300 million investment into EV infrastructure, with the aim to have 300,000 in place by the end of the decade. We are 4.5 years away for the end of the decade. You've got 300,000, that's what, 28,000 roughly, have I got that right? 28,000 a year that you've got to be putting into place if you want to hit that target. Will they do it? Is it possible? Is it doable? We'll have more comment from you. It's the charging dilemma. I think we can call it the charging dilemma. We've had some interesting response on that. It's not buyer's remorse necessarily, although our last caller, Elle, did clearly have some regrets, and she shifted from EV back to your conventional combustion engine. But your response on that as well. We will cross to Tel Aviv in just a second to get more on what has been happening there. Let me just wrap up the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? It's the mystery voice with a political edge. This is the voice we played you.
I can't guarantee that.
That's been going on. That's the third day of that voice. Some of the guesses, Michael Howard is a bit Michael Howard-y. I kind of get that. Boris Johnson, no. Michael Foot, no. Nigel Lawson, no. David Mellor, it is not. Richard Dalton, it is not. We do not have a correct answer. Have a listen to the voice again.
I can't guarantee that.
I think that's darn hard. I think that's probably one of the hardest we've done, because it doesn't jump out as like, oh, I know who that. Yeah, it's. Yeah, I think we've got a stinker on our hands, as the phrase goes. Could go on for years, this one. But we didn't get a right answer today. It means it's back tomorrow at about 2:45. Now, there are fears Iran could abandon a key treaty preventing the spread of nuclear weapons as fighting with Israel enters a fourth day. We've had civilian losses as well. 24 Israelis killed. Iran reports more than 200 dead. Former US President Donald Trump has called for a ceasefire, but warned Tehran that America would use its full strength if Iran targets US forces. Let's speak with Elon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman and now host of Israel's State of a Nation podcast. Joins us live from Tel Aviv. Elon, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian. Good afternoon.
When you see and look up in the skies on our TV pictures at these, incredibly disturbing scenes of all sorts of battles taking place, an objective onlooker would say, well, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, as the old phrase goes. These are two powers fighting each other. Where do we point the finger of blame?
Yeah, we're really seeing some extraordinary scenes here with Israeli planes in control of the airspace over Tehran. I mean, imagine if the RAF could fly freely over Berlin in October 1939. Israel has taken the initiative here of doing the world a service, of destroying the Iranian nuclear project before Iran could get nukes. But let's not mistake ourselves into thinking that this conflict started on Friday. The Iranian regime has been waging a war of aggression against Israel on 7 fronts since the October 7th massacre. That's when Hamas, an Iranian proxy army, invaded Israel and was then joined by Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other Iranian proxy forces across the region, raining missiles against Israel from every direction. So what Israel is doing now is holding the Iranian regime to account for that war of aggression, but even more importantly, stepping in to stop the Iranian regime just before it could develop nuclear weapons and to cut off the ballistic missile program that threatened to engulf this country with ballistic missiles, but also export huge numbers of ballistic missiles to other anti-Western hostile actors.
And we also know, Elon, and I can never work. My fellow humans fascinate me sometimes, and I look at people on social media protesting, talking. Israel is this terrible terrorist state and all the rest of it. I think, hang on a second, hang on. We are talking about Iran here. These are the sort of almost the orchestrators, the puppet masters of Middle Eastern terrorism. These are the Tony Sopranos, if you like, of the region that are making this happen with, as you say, you mentioned Hezbollah and others. They're in charge of that. This is not a good regime. It's a horrendous regime. It has a bad CV of terrible, terrible things. And yet, for some reason, that all seems to get lost because the go-to response from many is still, Israel are the bad guys. And Israel, by the way, a country that is this big on a map, if people care to look, surrounded by countries that are far bigger and larger and certainly more threatening and dangerous.
Yeah, it doesn't get more David and Goliath than tiny little Israel taking on the powerful country of Iran to stop it getting nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary what we're seeing here because you mentioned Tony Soprano. From the way the Iranian regime talks, the way it leads crowds in chants of death to Israel, death to America, death to England, even, this is cartoon villain-like behavior. It doesn't get clearly more malign than Iran. And I think Britain is perfectly aware that Iran is an enemy state. The British government, previous government, this one, have spoken of Iran's malign influence. Its attempts to carry out attacks inside Britain, its targets, attacks against British targets. And I think that's why most foreign governments, while paying lip service, to the need for de-escalation, are really quite happy that Israel is doing their dirty work by having the courage to destroy the Iranian nuclear project when they would never take military action, and they appreciate that their approach of diplomacy has failed. But yeah, there you have it. There is a huge section of the population in Britain as well, for whom Israel is the ultimate bogeyman, and nothing Israel ever does will ever be right because they think that Israel shouldn't exist. And you see what Israel derangement syndrome does to people when it has you taking the side of the brutal religious theocratic regime.
Yes, that's the bit that I can never quite get my head around. It's like, why would you be somehow endorsing this? Oh, the poor Iranian regime. Have you never watched the news or read a paper or a book or something? And yet, this is sort of where we're at. Even last week on this programme, Elon, we had the former ambassador to Iran, former British ambassador to Iran. What I mentioned about Iran's ambitions to build a potential nuclear setup in their country, he literally called it BS live on air. He shouted out the word there, as if I'd said the most outrageous, impossible thing in the world.
I mean, the funny thing is that Iran's claims that it's not trying to build nuclear weapons are about the most transparent lie there is. Because why then does it have 400 kilos of uranium enriched to 60%? What can you do with highly enriched uranium apart from build a nuclear bomb? It's not for civilian energy. It's not for medical isotopes. The reason that you dig a nuclear reactor into a mountain and keep it secret from the whole world in order to develop highly enriched uranium is because you want to build a nuclear bomb. And when Iran's leaders say Israel must be destroyed and it's a cancer that must be eradicated, and at the same time it's enriching uranium you would only need for a nuclear bomb, you don't need to be Israeli Mossad intelligence level to put two and two together and figure out what the Iranians are doing. And now Israel is taking this action because Israeli intelligence has shown, master slipped under the radar for Western intelligence agencies, that Iran had taken action to start assembling a nuclear bomb, the only plausible thing they could do with that highly enriched uranium.
Indeed. And as you say, a 10-year-old could work that out, you might think. And just a final point, where does this story go next, Elon? I mean, we know that, Israel have been able to command supremacy above Tehran in that region. It is a fighting air force you would not wish to take on too easily. Will it remain like this? Are the Iranians going to go, all right, okay, you fired your warning shots, we're gone now. What's likely to happen?
This is not the war the Iranian regime wanted to fight. It poured billions into filling the Middle East with proxy armies and destabilizing the region to try to protect its nuclear sites. It never expected that in just 3 days of war, Israeli planes would have total control of the skies of Iran. And what Israel is doing now is degrading Iran's ability to keep waging a war of aggression. In just 3 days, Israel has destroyed 1/3 of the launchers they were using to fire ballistic missiles, and it's going after those missiles as well, so that Iran cannot continue to rain hellfire on Israeli cities. You know, I had to run to a bomb shelter at 4 o'clock in the morning, and even 2 stories underground, there was a deafening explosion because a missile landed less than a kilometer away. They are targeting civilian areas. And so Israel says Iran represents 2 existential threats. The nuclear bomb, you can't allow them to get a nuke, and the ballistic missiles as well, because they could overwhelm your defenses. So Israel is going to keep going. There's basically nothing standing in its way to go after the regime targets. And Israel's hoping, of course, that at some point the regime's leaders are going to get the hint that there's nothing to fight for, and they're going to try to flee. And ultimately, if the regime collapses, if Iran is able to form a democracy, like the former crown prince is calling, well, then that would be a whole new Middle East, because Iran would no longer have a government that wants to destroy Israel. So the conflict's gone.
Spot on. Listen, Elon, you stay safe. Thank you for being on with us. I really appreciate that. Elon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman, is now host of the podcast Israel, State of a Nation. Thank you to him. Back to you in a couple of seconds. On EVs, by the way, Francis in Sussex says a friend bought a new electric Jag for £70,000. After 3 years, it was worth 14,000. I don't think I'd ever spend 70. I've got mates who, you know, really go Billy Big Potatoes when it comes to cars. They love a new car. They just still do. And I think, yeah, I can understand that aspiration when I was about, 21. I don't have any vanity around cars these days. Maybe it's because I've got 2 kids, or kind of monkey-like creatures, I suppose you'd call them, that go in the car. And if you want to see a place wrecked in about half an hour, just stick 2 kids and a bag of Wotsits in your car, and I'll promise you'll think twice about paying extra for that upholstery colour you wanted. It's not just that, it's just that £70,000 buys a lot of other stuff, and I don't know. But yeah, if you're buying it and it's worth 14k, 3 years later, the depreciation on that is so vast that you'd have to rethink ever doing it again, wouldn't you? You might think. Let's go to Paddy in Sussex. Back onto that issue of Israel. Paddy, what are you thinking? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. People always describe Iran as developing nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
There's nothing to develop. The technology is the 1940s. So Iran already has the delivery system. These hypersonic missiles that are hitting Tel Aviv, etc., can carry nuclear weapons.
Right.
And they've got, we don't know how much enriched uranium they have, because they can build their own gas centrifuges, and they are all under mountains.
Yeah.
So, I understand the Israeli position. Theoretically, Iran could wipe them out in the blink of an eye, because Israel is really only a 1 nuke country. That's because it's so small.
Yeah.
Iran could take much more punishment. So, I get their position. They're tempted to nuke the underground facility in Iran.
Why is it hard for people to understand, Paddy, that, this is Iran we're talking about here. It's not some, it's not a lovely kind of leafy seaside town somewhere off the East Anglian coast. This is a brutal terrorist regime who hate Israel, loathe the West. It's not democratic. It's a horrendous system that it runs. People want to escape it. Half the people who come across the channel on boats are coming from Iran at certain times. Who can blame them? And yet, for some reason, there's this sort of weird school of thought that they're the good guys and Israel are the bad ones.
Well, I wouldn't say one side is the good guys and the other are the bad ones, because we had a democratically elected leader in Iran, and we, the Brits, overthrew him. He was called Mossadegh. And when we overthrew him...
You're going back a bit, of course.
We put in this crown prince. That doesn't scream out democracy to me, putting in a crown prince.
Lovely crown prince he was.
Or the Shah, should I say. We're putting in a crown prince. So we got a lot worse than what we... that's like you're trying to fathom logic in Western responses and allyship and who's an enemy, who's not, and why the following week they might no longer be the enemy, but they're your friend. Blah, blah, blah. Listen, Paddy, we could talk for longer on this. Thank you very much indeed for that. Adi in Aldington, Adlington even, says, simple maths, this is reference to the EV charging dilemma. If an EV takes 8 times longer to charge than to fill a petrol or diesel car, then, for example, a motorway service area would have to increase 8-fold to achieve the same throughput. If we all converted to electric, which is not realistic. Says, yeah, it's that, right? That's just, well, as Adi says, basic maths. You'd have to do that in order to achieve that if you wanted to clear the decks and get the same amount of traffic through at the same rate. Back with more from you shortly. 0344 499 1000.
You can't try and snipe at the Conservatives for things that weren't our fault.
Oh, I mean, I haven't got time. Tell your big mate Donald Trump to tell his big mate Vladimir Putin to stop killing people, then we can solve that problem like that. Are you going to be a net contributor to our society? But are you going to better the lives of the people already here?
Won't be surprised to know I disagree.
Why? Why do you disagree, though? Why do you want our young people left on the scrap heap? The court's time being wasted, laying down a ruling on what is a woman.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Grant says, oh my God, the arrogance of the Israeli government. They have invaded and systematically destroyed and killed another country. Iran is not alone. If the North Koreans decided to join, they have nuclear weapons. Does a nuclear bomb have to go off in Israel for them to think? This one comes in from Steve in Notts, who says, great show. On the way back from Scotland at Easter, we saw our first charger rage incident. This is reference EV charging. There was a queue of about 6 cars. The guy at the back of the queue appointed himself to repeatedly go up and down, policing the cars already charging, asking how long they're going to be, and making comments such as, you're on 84%. Are you going to the effing moon? I'd love to have seen this. Fortunately, he thought better of challenging the car containing 4 football fans who'd just seen their team lose 3-1 at home. Great show, says Steve. I'd imagine that goes on at some. Imagine how annoying that is, somebody clocking your But then also, I suppose simultaneously, just trying to do the kind of the sort of middle ground thing here. If you were in a big long queue and somebody's got to 84%, wouldn't you go, mate, you've got enough to go now? Don't go for 100% when there's a queue. But it shouldn't be like this, should it? It shouldn't be like this. Back to that issue of the inquiry that we began with. Sophia is in the Netherlands. Sophia, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, maybe it would be wise to not do a national inquiry, but an international inquiry.
Interesting.
According to sexual crime, and because there's so much trafficking of children used for sex, and it's all, you don't, if you can do it nationally in every country, independent, but if you really want to trigger it, maybe start doing it internationally.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why, as a result of inquiries like this, that maybe other countries would also kind of step up to the plate a bit, and because I'm pretty sure that wherever you go, in different forms, this happens to be a form of grooming gang abuse. You just alluded there to the trafficking of children, the kidnapping of children.
The same structure. Always they go for the weak children.
100%.
They come from the disturbed homes. It's everywhere the same structure.
Yeah, 100%. Sophia, thank you very much indeed for that. The same structure. Back to that issue of charging. MT says, no, Ian, do you live in a terraced house, 2-car families to one household? You can hardly ever park outside your home. How are you charging your car? Not happening. I think MT is mate, so I don't know who it's from. Well, I know that. Yeah, I do. I mean, you're telling me that like I've said opposite to that. That's exactly my point. Yes, there is a problem. Steve in Brighton, why do taxpayers have to pay for EV charging infrastructure? Nobody ever asked the taxpayer to subsidise petrol stations. They got built because there was a market for the product, which made sense to consumers. EVs clearly do not make sense to the average consumer, hence no private companies are prepared to finance the charging network. Yeah, a lot of people that did originally throw money into the charging network then said, well, no, we're not sure about this one. But I think part of the green dream, if you want to look at it like that, is that it's people like Ed Miliband are so wedded to this that putting public money into something that you wouldn't do so if it was, as Steve just said, if it was just a petrol car. Oh yeah, we want some taxes to build some petrol stations. Nobody would go, well, get on your bike, mate, build your own petrol stations. It's a bit like, we touched on this gets into a little bit sort of conspiracy territory. Like, I can't fathom a need or a reason for the driverless car. I'm talking about taxis here. If you want one yourself, where you sit in it and it drives for you, that's up to you. But the idea that companies like Uber are piloting the driverless car, of which each model must be about £500,000 worth, compared to a Prius and a bloke that earns about 25 grand a year, and if that, when he's taken his commission. I don't get it. What's the need? If you look at stress of invention and innovation and manufacturing and upkeep, even if in 10 years' time, like Uber would go, oh yeah, we actually make more money out of cars now because we don't have a driver there. But the driver was only ever on a commission anyway, or he paid you a commission, whatever it was. So are you making so much more per journey in the driverless car? And if you are, I'd say that's 20 years down the line, not even 20 months. So why the desire? Why would you put that amount of money into something? If somebody said on Dragon's Den, right, we've got a driverless car, passenger goes in the back, it's a driverless cab, and it's got all the cameras in it, how much does each model cost? Right, okay, we need £500,000 to research it, and we need £500,000 to make it, but don't worry, we'll get our money back. When will you get your money back? Or probably in 25 years' time, each car will have paid for itself. Right, well, you need to replace it by then, maybe. Right, it's a lot of effort, a lot of time, and no massive profit for what? So you are forced to think, well, is there another reason Why? Is it the idea that machinery is dominant over individuals? I can't think why. What a great waste of money. It's like, well, let's not bother with the driverless cab experiment. Let's just get a person to drive it. What's to be gained? I stand to be educated. Maybe there's a great reason. Richard is down in London. Back to that big issue we began with as to whether we believe an inquiry, as announced by Keir Starmer at the weekend, will get to the truth. What are you thinking, Richard? Afternoon.
Hi, Ian. I think the thing that occurs to me more than anything is that there's also supposed to be an inquiry going on into why we didn't, what went wrong in terms of why they didn't stop, why Prevent weren't able to stop Axel Rudakabana. And the more I think about this, and I'm reminded of the fact I think I once, I think I first spoke to you back in 2010. I think you were actually working on another network, and I rang up on the evening of the 2010 riots. Right. And it just occurs to me, Ian, we've been talking about these problems day after day, week after week. It just occurs to me that someone's going to have to kind of acknowledge that these problems, if they're not already, they're becoming unmanageable. I mean, just two examples. If you look at there's some footage you can see on the internet of Axel Rudakabana sort of kicking off in the classroom, and there's a very frightened teacher obviously backing off from him, and he's being restrained by another pupil. I know that's slightly off the subject, but the point is, it's a bit like if we go to the rape gang inquiries. You had one inquiry into the events around Stephen Lawrence, and that was one event. We now have about what 50 cities where we think this has gone on. Yeah. I mean, the point is, can you see my point? This is about the simple reality that we are dealing with social problems that, frankly, are unmanageable, and it's more important that we actually kind of acknowledge that than we look for kind of, some sort of recompense. I mean, the reality is, I've said to you, I've rung up several times, and each time I find myself saying the same thing. This sort of thing should not be happening in Britain. Yep. I think the left tried to change Britain in the post-war period, and they wanted to create a different sort of society. Effectively, I think this is one gigantic social engineering project. I think the Conservatives did a reasonably good job of opposing it, certainly under Margaret Thatcher. But we're now, it seems to me, Ian, that we're now at a stage where we just got to acknowledge these problems are just almost too big to put it this way. There are no easy solutions. But what I would do, certainly, if I was a parent now, I would be saying I will not send my child to a state school anymore because I just don't feel they're going to be safe. Wow. And in these, well, simply because in these parts of the country, this has gone on for 20 years, and teachers, social workers, and police. I mean, don't tell me this. I mean, Ian, it's massive. And the other thing I'd like to say, Ian, I mean, if we're serious about this, I mean, if you look at Prevent say they're monitoring about sort of 55,000 people that could be involved in terrorism. Now, you could say that you get Prevent to look after to monitor the rape gangs, but it would be astronomical. But Ian, if we're going to save young people going forward, this I'm afraid is going to cost, and we're going to have to fund it somehow. And if somebody said to me, "Look, okay, Richard, we can sort this out. We'll get Mossad in. They know all about these sorts of problems, and let's get them to advise on what you should be doing." Now, I wouldn't be wasting any time, Ian, and because the more important thing is the future, not the past. How can we deal with these evil gangs? Yeah. We need to be listening to them, using all the tools of MI5 to listen. Well, you'd kind of, I mean, you're right, and it's barely touched the sides. And the suspicion, Richard, sadly, is that maybe an inquiry won't fully touch the sides, and that is something that is going to be done under more glare and analysis than probably any other inquiry before it. So we can, I mean, it sounds very weak and it sounds inept to say we can just hope
and cross our fingers that it does delve into all those areas it needs to. Richard, I've got to move for no other reason than time, but thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. We are expecting the Home Secretary to be speaking on this very, very soon. We'll cross live to the House of Commons. When that happens, we know the session is up and running, but a statement specifically on this point from Yvette Cooper is imminent. We'll bring it to you right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One in from Colin, who says, has Starmer now done a U-turn now regarding the grooming gangs? Because we're now going to have to, about 10 days of brilliant weather, and it will take the focus of illegal migrants coming over now. As they're becoming in big numbers. 1,500 over the course, essentially the course of the weekend, 3 or 4 days. And that's going to accelerate over the course. I'd be surprised if it doesn't, but, you know, we know how it tends to work. That's the one area. So he's done a U-turn on winter fuel allowance. I'm trying to think of, is it called, winter fuel, is that right? Is that the right title, winter fuel allowance? You know, when you get a word blindness in your head. That, I think it is. So he's done a U-turn on that. He's done a U-turn on this. Is he going to do a U-turn on Rwanda or something? Is he going to literally stand up and go, do you know what, in the absence of any other good idea, and the 4 million a day or 5, 7, 8 million, whatever, on the absence of that, we're going to go for it. Bring back Rwanda, everybody. Yeah, where's all the old ministers? Come back in. You know where, you know where the files are on this one. Let's go to Matt in Cheshire on this point. How you doing, Matt?
Hi, good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon. What are your thoughts?
We're waiting for the main U-turn is when he walks back down Downing Street out through the railings to never come back. That's the only U-turn anyone's interested in.
Well, listen, stay there 1 second, Matt. Don't disappear, because we know the Home Secretary is literally on her feet now. Let's have a listen to what she has to say.
This vile crime, to put perpetrators behind bars, and to provide the innocent victims of those crimes with support and justice. The House will be aware that on Friday, 7 men were found guilty of the most horrendous crimes in Rochdale between 2000 and 2006. They were convicted of treating teenage girls as sex slaves, repeatedly raping them in filthy flats, alleyways, and warehouses. The perpetrators included taxi drivers and market traders of Pakistani heritage, and it has taken 20 years to bring them to justice. I want to pay tribute to the incredible bravery of the women who told their stories and have fought for justice through all those years. They should never have been let down for so long. The sexual exploitation of children by grooming gangs is one of the most horrific crimes. Children as young as 10 plied with drugs and alcohol, brutally raped by gangs of men and disgracefully let down again and again by the authorities who were meant to protect them and keep them safe. And these despicable crimes have caused the most unimaginable harm to victims and survivors throughout their lives and are a stain on our society. 5 months ago, I told the House our most important task was to stop perpetrators and put them behind bars. I can report that work is accelerating. Arrests and investigations are increasing. After I asked police forces in January to identify cases involving grooming and child sexual exploitation allegations that had been closed with no further action, more than 800 cases have now been identified for formal review, and I expect that figure to rise above 1,000 in the coming weeks. Let me be clear. Perpetrators of these vile crimes should be off our streets, behind bars, and paying the price for what they have done. Further rapid action is also underway to implement recommendations of past inquiries and reviews, including the 7-year independent inquiry into child abuse, recommendations which for too long have sat on the shelf. So in the Crime and Policing Bill, we are introducing the long overdue mandatory reporting duty, which I called for more than 10 years ago, as well as aggravated offences for grooming offenders so their sentences match the severity of their crimes. And earlier this year, I also commissioned Baroness Louise Casey to undertake a rapid national audit of the nature, scale and characteristics of gang-based exploitation. I specifically asked her to look at the issue of ethnicity and the cultural and social drivers for this type of offending, analysis that had never previously been done, despite years of concerns being raised. And I asked her to advise us on what further reviews, investigations and actions would be needed to address the current and historical failures that she found. I told Parliament in January I expected Baroness Casey to deliver the same kind of impactful and no-holds-barred report that she produced on Rotherham in 2015, so we never shy away from the reality of these terrible crimes. And I am very grateful to Louise and her team that they have done exactly that, with a hugely wide-ranging assessment conducted in just 4 months. The findings of her audit are damning. At its heart, she identifies a deep-rooted failure to treat children as children, a continued failure to protect children and teenage girls from rape, from exploitation and serious violence, and from the scars that last a lifetime. She finds too much fragmentation in the authorities' response, too little sharing of information, too much reliance on flawed data, too much denial, too little justice, too many criminals getting off, too many victims being let down. The audit describes victims as young as 10, often those in care, or children with learning or physical disabilities, being singled out for grooming precisely because of their vulnerability. Perpetrators still walking free because no one joined the dots, or because the law ended up protecting them instead of the victims that they had exploited. Deep-rooted institutional failures, stretching back decades where organisations who should have protected children and punished offenders looked the other way. And Baroness Casey found blindness, ignorance, prejudice, defensiveness, and even good but misdirected intentions all played a part in this collective failure. And on the key issues of ethnicity that I'd asked her to examine, she has found continued failure to gather proper, robust national data, despite concerns being raised going back very many years. In the local data that the audit examined from 3 police forces, they identify clear evidence of overrepresentation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men. And she refers to examples of organisations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist or raising community tensions. These findings are deeply disturbing. But most disturbing of all, as Baroness Casey makes clear, is the fact that too many of these findings are not new. As Baroness Casey's audit sets out, there have been 15 years of reports, reviews, inquiries and investigations into these appalling rapes, exploitation and violent crimes against children, detailed over 17 pages in her report, but too little has changed. We have lost more than a decade That must end now. Yeah. Baroness Casey sets out 12 recommendations for change. We will take action on all of them immediately because we cannot afford more wasted years. So we will introduce new laws to protect children and support victims so they stop being blamed for the appalling crimes committed against them. Yeah. New major police operations to pursue perpetrators and put them behind bars. New national inquiry to direct local investigations and hold institutions to account for past failures. New ethnicity data and research so we face up to the facts on exploitation and abuse. New action across children's services and other agencies to identify children at risk. And further action to support child victims and tackle the new forms of exploitation and abuse online. Taken together, this will mark the biggest programme of work ever pursued to root out the scourge of grooming gangs and child sexual exploitation. Those vile perpetrators who have grown used to the authorities looking the other way must have no place to hide. Yeah. So let me spell out the next steps we're announcing today. Baroness Casey's first recommendation is we must see children as children. She concludes too many grooming cases have been dropped or downgraded from rape to lesser charges because a 13 to 15-year-old is perceived to have been in love with or had consented to sex with the perpetrator. So we will change the law to ensure that adults who engage in penetrative sex with a child under 16 face the most serious charge of rape. And we will work closely with the CPS and the police to ensure there are safeguards for consensual teenage relationships. We will change the law so that those convicted for child prostitution offences, while their rapists got off scot-free, will have their convictions disregarded and their criminal records expunged. Baroness Casey's next recommendation is a national criminal operation. As I've set out, arrests and investigations are rising, but the audit recommends us going further. So I can announce the police will launch a new national criminal operation into grooming gangs, overseen by the National Crime Agency, bringing together for the first time all arms of the policing response, and will develop a rigorous new national operating model which all forces across the country will be able to adopt, ensuring grooming gangs are always treated as serious and organised crime. And so rapists who groom children, whether their crimes were committed decades ago or are still being committed today, can end up behind bars. But alongside justice, there must also be accountability and action. We've begun implementing the recommendations from inquiries past, including Professor Jay's independent inquiry, and we've said that further inquiries are needed to get accountability in local areas. I told the House in January I would undertake further work to look at how to ensure those inquiries could get the evidence they needed to properly hold institutions to account, and we have sought responses from local councils too. We asked Baroness Casey to review those responses as well as the arrangements and powers that had been used in past investigations and inquiries to consider the best means to get to the truth. Her report concludes that further local investigations are needed, but they should be directed and overseen by a national commission with statutory inquiry powers. We agree, and we will set up a national inquiry to that effect. Baroness Casey is not recommending another overarching inquiry of the kind conducted by Professor Alexis Jay, and she recommends that the inquiry should be time-limited. But its purpose must be to challenge what the audit describes as continued denial, resistance and legal wrangling among local agencies, and we will set out the further details on the national inquiry in due course. Mr. Speaker, I warned in January that the data collection we had inherited from the previous government on ethnicity was completely inadequate. It was only collected on 37% of suspects. Baroness Casey's audit confirms that ethnicity data is not recorded for 2/3 of grooming gang perpetrators, and she says it is not good enough to support any statements about the ethnicity of group-based child sexual exploitation offenders at the national level. I agree with that conclusion, and frankly it is ridiculous and helps no one that this basic information is not collected especially when there have been warnings and recommendations stretching back 13 years about the woefully inadequate data on perpetrators, which prevents patterns of crime being understood and tackled. The immediate changes I announced in January to police recording practices are starting to improve the data, but we will need to go much further. Baroness Casey's audit examined local-level data in 3 police force areas, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, where high-profile cases involving Pakistani heritage men have long been investigated and reported. And there they found the suspects of group-based child sexual offences were disproportionately likely to be Asian men. She also found indications of disproportionality in serious case reviews. And while much more robust national data is needed, we cannot and must not shy away from these findings because, as Baroness Casey says, ignoring the issues, not examining and exposing them to the light, allows the criminality and depravity of a minority of men to be used to marginalise whole communities. The vast majority of people in our British, Asian and Pakistani heritage communities continue to be appalled by these terrible crimes and agree that the criminal minority of sick predators and perpetrators in every community must be dealt with robustly by the criminal law. Baroness Casey's review also identifies prosecutions and investigations into perpetrators who are white, British, European, African or Middle Eastern, just as Alexis Jay's inquiry concluded that all ethnicities and communities were involved in appalling child abuse crimes. So to provide accurate information to help tackle serious crimes, we will make it a formal requirement for the first time to collect both ethnicity and nationality data for all cases of child sexual abuse and exploitation, and we will commission new research into the cultural and social drivers of child sexual exploitation, misogyny and violence against women and girls, as Baroness Casey has recommended. The final group of recommendations from the audit is about the continued failure of agencies who should be keeping children safe to share vital information or act on clear signs of risk. And worryingly, the audit finds that whilst reports of child sexual abuse and exploitation to the police have gone up, the number of child sexual abuse cases identified for protection plans by local children's services has fallen to its lowest ever level, but no one has been curious as to why. And the audit details an abysmal failure to respond to 15 years' worth of recommendations and warnings about the failings of interagency cooperation. So we will act at pace to deliver on Baroness Casey's recommendations on mandatory sharing of information between agencies and on unique reference numbers for children, the work already being taken forward by my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary. And my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will also work at pace to close loopholes in the law on taxi licensing. Finally, I want to respond to 3 other important issues identified by Baroness Casey in her report, but where she has not made specific recommendations. On support for victims, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will fund additional training for mental health staff in schools on identifying and supporting children and young people who have experienced trauma, exploitation and abuse. Secondly, Baroness Casey reports that she came across cases involving suspects who were asylum seekers. We have asked her team to provide to the Home Office all the evidence that they found, so the immigration enforcement can immediately pursue individual cases with the police. But let me make clear, those who groom children or who commit sexual offences will not be granted asylum in the UK. We will do everything in our power to remove them. I do not believe the law is strong enough that we have inherited, so we are bringing forward a change to the law so that anyone convicted of sexual offences is excluded from the asylum system and denied refugee status. We've already increased the removal of foreign national offenders by 14% since the election, and we're drawing up new arrangements to identify and remove those who have committed a much wider range of offences. Finally, Baroness Casey describes ways in which patterns of grooming gang child sexual exploitation are changing. including evidence of rape and sexual exploitation taking place in street gangs and drug gangs that combine criminal and sexual exploitation. I do not believe that this kind of exploitation has been sufficiently investigated. It also describes sexual exploitation in modern slavery and trafficking cases, and most significant of all, it describes the huge increase in online grooming and horrendous sexual exploitation and abuse, including the use of social media apps to build up relationships and lure children into physical abuse. And the audit quotes one police expert saying, "If Rotherham were to happen again today, it would start online." So, Mr. Speaker, we are also passing world-leading new laws to target those who groom and exploit children online, investing in cutting-edge technology to target the highest harm offenders, but we will need to do much more, or the new scandals and shameful crimes of the future will be missed. When the final report of Alexis Jay's 7-year national inquiry was published in October 2022, the then Home Secretary, Grant Shapps, issued a profound and formal public apology to the victims of child sexual abuse so badly let down over decades by different levels of the state. As Shadow Home Secretary at that time, I joined him in that apology on behalf of the opposition and extended it to victims of child sexual exploitation too. To the victims and survivors of sexual exploitation and grooming gangs, on behalf of this and past governments and the many public authorities who let you down, I want to reiterate an unequivocal apology for the unimaginable pain and suffering that you have suffered and the failure of our country's institutions through decades to prevent that harm and keep you safe. But words are not enough. Victims and survivors need action. The reforms I've set out today will mean the strongest action any government has taken to tackle child sexual exploitation, more police investigations, more arrests, a new inquiry, changes to the law to protect children, and a fundamental overhaul of the way organisations work to support victims and put perpetrators behind bars. But none of this will work unless everyone is part of it, unless everyone works together to keep our children safe. I commend this statement to the House.
The Home Secretary making that announcement referenced the grooming gang inquiry. She gave some details of what Louise Casey, who'd put in that report beforehand, had made, and further details, of course, of all of that as we pour over. More of it will come out in due course. That was Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, speaking. Jeremy Kyle, of course, will be here after 4 and will continue to take response on this. We were talking to Matt in Cheshire, Matt, before you were rather rudely interrupted by the Home Secretary, but that's the way these things roll, I guess. But you were talking about this inquiry.
Yeah. Welcome to the far right, Yvette Cooper.
That's right.
Notice there wasn't a single man in Labour's front bench, not a staged all-woman lineup to comfort the victims and the public from the psychotics in the Labour Party who are knee-deep in the vilest scandal in our history. The knowing guilt on Angela Rayner and Bridget Phillipson's face is palpable. They didn't look angry like the rest of us. They looked like they were putting on a staged, acted face. Nothing at all about Pakistani communities and how the state will maybe have a look at them and see what's going on in those communities. Not a single word to just like Pakistani men is a group that came from space or something like that on its own and has nothing to do with...
Did she not mention, Matt, that these were men of Pakistani extraction, but also recognised that in 2/3 of cases where men had been arrested, ethnicity hadn't been recorded?
She mentioned Pakistani men repeatedly, but she didn't mention the Pakistani community, which is where Pakistani men come from.
Okay. Yeah.
She talks as if they're like a detachment that's nothing to do with the rest of them.
Yeah, well, that's a crucial component to this, isn't it?
Of course it is.
It's not just the perpetrators, it's the people who protected the perpetrators, and are there other perpetrators out there who would equally be as protected?
Spot on, Ian. And finally, just one more, a parade of new mechanisms and named branches like those announced to stop the boats, i.e. Border Command, etc.
Yeah.
The most unempathetic, robotic, repulsive, horrible speech you could ever imagine for an event of such gravitas that's in the heart of the British people and always will be until it's dealt with.
And I think you speak for quite a lot of British people with that comment, Matt. Thank you very much indeed. Other comments coming in from you as well. Reference Israel and Tehran. I'm going to just bring this one in. Chris in Brighton says, I'm usually a fan of the show, but it's disappointing to hear you parroting without question exactly the same weapons of mass destruction nonsense about Iran that was used against Iraq. It is as if you've learnt nothing from history. You have to remember, fair point, Chris. I mean, I take that. But, of course, Iraq, there's always a bit of a urban myth around that. Iraq did say they had weapons of mass destruction. I mean, they were happy for the world to believe they had weapons of mass destruction. Plans found of weapons of mass destruction. I think the idea that Iran could be, let's put it this way, dangerous isn't too much of a leap. But I hear your point, Chris. Thank you. Jeremy Kyle.
The mad mullahs of Iran have been financing every single terrorist cell for as many years as possible.
Hence the reason why it's not a big leap of, it's not a crazy leap of imagination. I think these people might be dangerous over there in Iran.
Think about the Houthis, think about Hamas, think about Hezbollah. Just work it out. Listen, sorry, have I missed? I mean, honestly, could somebody just help me with this, right?
Yes.
I thought the Keir Starmer and his government refused to have a national inquiry.
The right-wingers.
It was right-wingers.
For the right-wingers.
Yeah.
For the dirty right-winger. Bandwagon
Which is what they said when we
jumpers.
were to the streets.
Bandwagon.
Yeah, bandwagon.
Bandwagon, right-wingers.
What's happened since I was here on Wednesday? What happened?
They had everything.
Well, you mean Baroness Casey's report came out, which systematically said
pre-read of it.
What we've said for ages, which is the police admitted in Rotherham that they didn't do anything about it for 8 years because they were worried about cultural division, right?
Yeah.
So certain minorities or certain religions or certain creeds or colours are not going to be investigated. The Tories aren't blameless in this. This has been going on for years.
100%.
Unbelievable. How many U-turns is he going to make?
I think he's got 500 penciled in.
More than that. How was your lunch on Saturday? I see that the Power triumvirate went out for lunch. You and Julia and Kev, you were sending pictures.
Well, I wasn't.
No.
Somebody sent a picture, it was very nice.
Who paid?
You know what it's like at the Wimpy. You know
Who
what?
paid?
Three-way.
Did you?
Three-way.
You had a three-way with Julia and Kevin.
Stop it.
There's the thought.
Yeah, I won't say who was drinking the most expensive fizz, but that's another story.
That will be Julia.
You think?
I was surprised I wasn't surprised to see you out. I was quite pleased, but I know with you have to go out early, don't you? You don't like to stay out late.